Elden Ring is a masterpiece in game design, from both a gameplay perspective and, more central to this video, a story perspective as well. Elden Ring is a massive world with an equally massive story, and so today, I'd like to spend some time talking about it. I'll not only be explaining the story of Elden Ring throughout this video so you know exactly what's going on, but I'll also be analyzing it along the way, digging into the hows and whys of the characters, attempting to understand why they do the things they do, and try to answer a lot of the more confusing lore questions the game has yet to answer. As always, like the video if you enjoy, and subscribe if you're new. Feel free to check out my other story-related content, such as my explanation-only videos, as well as the ones which focus on analysis and critique. The channel also has a Patreon now, so if you'd like to support, you could do so for as little as $1 a month. And as always, thank you to my returning viewers for coming back to another video. Without further ado, let's get started. The Fallen Leaves tell a story about the lands between, the setting of the game. Within this land, the Elden Ring was shattered. During this time, Queen Marika, the leader of this land, disappeared, and her children, known as the demigods, all seemed to have warred with each other, claiming runes of the broken Elden Ring for themselves. Despite the rune's power and the demigods' inherent power, no one could claim the title of Elden Lord. So grace was given to those called the Tarnished, in hope that they could claim the title for themselves, which becomes our objective. As Tarnished, we are to surpass all who came before us and claim the title of Elden Lord. All of that is pretty easy to understand. Everything else isn't. So let's take some time to discuss some of the history of the lands between. If you explore enough throughout the game, you'll end up deep in a sewer next to an NPC named Hyetta. She has a questline we'll cover in this video, but our conversation with her helps us understand how the world started. She says that all that came before started from the One Great. That was until the Greater Will came into the picture. It's unclear what it did, but according to her, it created births, souls, sins, and deaths. Even to this day, it's not clear what these two things are. Some people think they are physical beings, others believe they are formless and thus exist without a body. The One Great is similar to the names of the Great Ones from Bloodborne or the Great Old One from H.P. Lovecraft. Both of these describe them as powerful and indescribable beings who can exist on a cosmic scale. Some have even theorized that the One Great is more so a status, and that the Greater Will fractured the status quo, because of those aforementioned souls and sins that appeared shortly after. It's essentially Elden Ring's Big Bang. Two important things tied to the Greater Will are the Elden Ring and the Two Fingers. The Elden Ring is a set of combined runes that dictate the laws of the world, and the Two Fingers are envoys of the Greater Will. They will have a whole host of tasks ahead of them, from communing the thoughts of the Greater Will, which the finger readers like Enya will read aloud, as well as selecting Empyreans to inherit the Elden Ring, and gifting them shadows to serve as their protectors. To be considered the god or ruler of these lands, you must be an Empyrean who is selected by the Two Fingers. Queen Marika was one such person, a being who was an Empyrean with her own 2 fingers that was eligible for godhood. These are the basics and beginnings of the world that we inhabit. With the Greater Will's power available though, it was only a matter of time before someone claimed it for themselves. The first of which came from the ancient dragons. While the first god is unknown, the first Elden Lord is Dragon Lord Placidusax. It should be noted that god status, like Marika, is different from Elden Lord. Placidusax's remembrance states that they were the Elden Lord in a time before the Erdtree, or the time before Queen Marika. Once his god fled, however, the Lord continued to await its return. So it's clear that being a god and Elden Lord are two different things. It's an important distinction because our goal isn't necessarily to replace Marika, but to be her consort. We rule alongside her while she remains a god, at least that's the plan anyway. The reason the dragons were first is likely due to their immortality. The Dragon Moon Grease and the Dragon King Crag Blade both mention the word mortal when referring to the dragons of today, the same ones we battle throughout the lands between. This implies that the ancient dragons, their ancestors, were immortal. Not invincible, mind you, but immortal. So the dragons for an unspecified amount of time ruled the lands between under the power of the Elden Ring. Something further reinforcing this claim is the Elden Ring in Malekith's boss arena. The boss arena is located in Far Majula, the remnants of what used to be a large memorial for Placidusax. The arena is also littered in draconic imagery, with statues and beastmen all scattered around the area, showing us that not only was this a place of importance during the Dragon's era, but that they developed a functioning culture and religion of sorts too. The logo of the presumed Elden Ring is noticeably more vibrant and powerful compared to our Elden Ring. It's heavily theorized that this is what the Elden Ring looked like in the time of the dragons. The Elden Ring is an object that governs the very laws of the world. Adding or removing runes can fundamentally change the laws and physics of the world. What these roots at the bottom of the ring mean are unclear, but it may have something to do with the primordial form of the Erdtree. When Queen Marika first arose as god, which was sometime after the dragons, she would eventually establish the Golden Order. One of the shining symbols of the Golden Order was the Erdtree, the massive gold tree that could be seen from any corner of the map. It wasn't always this bright and holy though. In a time before the Erdtree, there was something called the Crucible. To this day, the identity of the Crucible is unknown. Some see it as an object, others an era of time. So to avoid confusion, it's best to identify what the Crucible represents instead. The best source of info on the Crucible are the Crucible Knights. Their armor reads, "Holds the power of the Crucible of Life, the primordial form of the Erdtree." The incantations they use, all called aspects of the Crucible, also read, "Manifestation of the Erdtree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial Crucible, where all life was once blended together." So it seems like prior to the Golden Order, the Erdtree existed but in a much more primitive state. What's more important, however, is the description of the incantations. The word crucible is used to define a small metal or ceramic container that holds metals that will be melted under high temperatures. You'll see this often used in blacksmithing jobs, and this connection is what I find to be the most important. The crucible was the culmination of all forms of life, where people and species intermingled and existed without form. Signs of the crucible include things like horns, scales, wings, and feathers. This is mainly seen in beings like Omen, demi-humans, and misbegotten. The game specifically calls these parts vestiges, which is defined as a trace of something that is disappearing or no longer exists, or a part of an organism that has been reduced or functionless in the course of evolution. I find the latter to be the more acceptable definition given what the crucible turned into. When the Golden Order was established under the rule of Queen Marika, aspects of the crucible were seen with disdain, and those with these aspects as subhuman. This is quite the revelation, as the Crucible Knot Talisman says that this was a signifier of the divine during the ancient times. So those with horns and feathers and such were seen as important people, but now under the Golden Order, they are second class, which now explains their current appearances in-game. The Misbegotten Ashes explains that most of them are used as slaves, most notably seen in Castle Morn to the south of the Weeping Peninsula, where the so-called servants, according to Irina, have overrun the castle. Omen from birth have their horns excised, which ends up killing most of them. Those who remain are forced to remove themselves from anything related to the Golden Order. You'll find them out in the sticks, far away from the Golden Order's influence or under the sewers of Lindell, forced to stay down there for eternity. Unlike the others, many believe Omen's blood to be cursed, so Omen killers are dispatched to kill them. To strike fear into the Omen they kill, they wear masks carved in the images of the evil spirits that haunt the Omen, and the weapons they wield have horns carved from the corpses of their dead comrades. Demi-humans, on the other hand, seem to have received the least amount of punishment. Still shunned by many, but others are more willing to accept them compared to their Crucible brothers. Shanehaight, a former Lord of Limgrave, wants to make peace with the demi-humans in the area, and some of the demi-humans were taught the power of magic. Although this one is admittedly a backhanded compliment, as the item description for the staff says that even those with a low intelligence can wield it, and sure enough, the staff has the lowest intelligence stat requirement in the game at a measly 10. Much of the reason behind the disdain of the Crucible and anything connected to it likely has to do with the DLC, but I'll save that for later. Regardless, from the items we've analyzed, the Crucible in many ways can be seen as the primitive times of life, where things are more focused on survival. Then when the Golden Order was established, all those primitive methods of life were shed away in favor for more civilized things. To me, I've always seen this the same way that we humans evolved from cavemen. Shout out to our ancestors, but it's clear that we are much more intelligent than they are. We don't walk around with clothes only covering our privates and aren't hunting animals with spears. We are much more dignified, and that's what the Golden Order represents to me, a more dignified and civilized society, where survival is a given and not a privilege. So the Crucible is a thing of the past, and a new era under the Erdtree begins, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, despite the Erdtree giving off that impression. Not everyone took a liking to the newly established Golden Order. The four groups in particular were the Fire Giants of the Mountaintops, the Nox of the Eternal Cities, the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and the Ancient Dragons. Minus the dragons, something consistent amongst the rest is that each group that opposed the Golden Order also crafted the means necessary to dismantle it. The Fire Giants were keepers of the Giant's Flame, which is strong enough to burn the Erdtree. The Gloam-Eyed Queen similarly had her own type of flame, called the Black Flame, which is seemingly able to kill the gods. Her beef with America actually predates the Golden Order, as she would harness the power of the Rune of Death, a rune that is a part of the Elden Ring, and use that to make the Black Flame. She had an army of her own called the Godskins, who were from a young age raised by her in a swaddling cloth of stitched together skin, a similar type of skin used on their clothes. Marika's fight with the Gloam-Eyed Queen is notable though, as the Queen was also an Empyrean, given her own 2 fingers and everything. So unlike the Giants who could only remove the Order if they won, the Gloam-Eyed Queen could have ascended to godhood and permanently changed the lands between if she succeeded. The Nox on the other hand don't have a flame, but they do have something just as deadly. One of the Eternal City's treasures is the Fingerslayer Blade, said to be deadly enough to kill the Greater Will and its vassals, the 2 Fingers. The blade itself is also said to have been born from a corpse, with what looks like a spine going up the blade. It's unclear what corpse it belongs to, but it's clear that the Nox meant business. They oftentimes even wore mirror helms, which are said to ward off intervention from the Greater Will and Two Fingers. So each of these factions not only wanted nothing to do with the Golden Order, but also had something that could dismantle the fundamental design of the Golden Order, be it the Erdtree, the Elden Ring, the Demigods, or the Two Fingers. Either of these factions claiming victory would have dealt a significant blow to the Order, and as such had to be dealt with. So each one of these groups was dealt with swiftly and efficiently. Marika, her Elden Lord Godfrey, the Fire Monks and the criminals who followed them, along with the Trolls, beings who were descendants of the Giants, all attacked the Giants at the mountaintops, resulting in the death of every Giant save for one. Marika herself even handled their god personally according to the One-Eyed Shield. The thorns protruding out of the Fire Giants' corpses are likely a result of the Prize of Sin spells. These are used by criminals who could be found traveling with the Fire Monks. The Fire Monks, meanwhile, watched over the Fire Giant from the mountaintops. The flame of the Fire Giants cannot be extinguished, so Marika cursed the Fire Giant to tend to it for eternity, while the Fire Monks made sure things went smoothly. However, over time they became so enthralled with the flame that they renounced their service to the Erdtree and worshipped the Fell God's flames. Moreover, a thief named Radahn stole some of the flame of the Fell God, and its description reads that the flame of the Fell God still dwells within the Giants. And sure enough, when the second phase against the Fire Giant begins, its eye opens up, further reinforcing that Marika didn't defeat the Fell God, merely halted its plans. The Gloam-Eyed Queen, however, was defeated by Marika's shadow, Malekith. Marika then removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring and had Malekith carry it with him, lest its power be retaken, which is when the Golden Order officially started. This caused the Godskins to fall into disarray, with each traveling alone or in a team of two, all seemingly focused on different goals. Most are stationed near divine towers and in places of importance, like Far Majula and Volcano Manor, likely to find the demigods or Malekith, while another is stationed at a remote village, one that seems to partake in the ritual of skinning those they find with their sharp weapons, likely in service to that godskin. And the Nox are banished underground, forced to live under a false night sky. Their real night sky seems to have been taken or destroyed. The Moon of Noxtella item says that it resembles the Lost Black Moon, and the Memory Stone item says that it contains fragments of that black moon. Its whereabouts are still unknown, but without it they have certainly lost the feeling of its presence. Forced underground, they hope that one day they can regain their power along with their new Lord of Night. But finding one hasn't been easy though, so they've instead taken to making their own. They've created all manner of beings down here, from standard humanoids to trolls. It's assumed that they also created the Albinaurics as well. The Albinaurics are a race of beings whose women look like this, while the men look like this. Well, at least the second generation. The first generation are more old and sickly. These beings were created by human hands according to the Albinauric blood clot. While it doesn't exactly confirm anything concrete, given the Nox's consistent attempts at creation, they are at the very least the most likely candidate. The Nox have even tried to replicate the dragons by creating their own called Dragonkin. Neither of these creations though are worthy enough to be the lord they need, nor as strong as their inspirations, leaving their future in stasis for the time being. The ancient dragons, however, are unique in that it doesn't seem like they had something that could dismantle the Golden Order. They also seem to be the ones who attacked first. Now, admittedly, it's not stated who attacked who in either war, but given the previous three groups had spells and items that could destroy the Golden Order, I assume Marika deemed this ample enough evidence to start a war. The dragons, on the other hand, just straight up invaded the royal capital. Gransack seems to be the one who started the war, as they tore through the walls of Lindell only to seemingly die within those same walls. This war led to some of the Tree Sentinels, described as Lindell's finest knights, to dabble in the art of lightning, imbuing their weapons and armor with it, using it as a means to smite the dragons. Surprisingly though, the war ended rather amicably. Ancient dragon Fortisax would befriend Godwyn, a child of Queen Marika, and Lanasax, sister to Fortisax, would not only fall in love with the warrior Vyke, but also cast away her dragon form for a human one, while eventually leading the teachings of the newly created ancient dragon cult. Something permitted under the Golden Order, as lightning shines the same color of gold as the Erdtree. Despite only mentioning 4 factions, there is a 5th one lurking underground, but the reason for the faction not being as well known within Elden Ring's history is due to them keeping to themselves and remaining neutral during the era of the Erdtree. Underground, along with the Nox, is a small tribe of ancestral followers. They seem to have ties to the Crucible, as they each display a set of horns, which seems to be headpieces and not actual growths, and their beliefs stem from horns. They worship ancestral spirits, which are these dead carcasses that are found within their territory. The ancestral followers believe that horns of long-lived beasts continue to grow like antlers even after death until the beast becomes an ancestral spirit. We could fight a couple of these spirits, so it seems like the practice has some truth to it. Due to their lack of presence in the game, they don't have much more than that, but this process seems to be a form of rebirth, as the remembrance of the regal ancestor spirit says that life sprouts from death, just as death comes from life. The fur raiments they wear further say that they await new buds that sprout from their very flesh. So this process of rebirth is not just connected to the ancestral spirits, but to the followers as well. The ancestral spirits are also known to exist outside the purview of the Erdtree, which could explain why the group has yet to engage in warfare and has continued to live peacefully amongst themselves. During these wars with the other species and factions of the lands between, Marika would have children known as the demigods. Before the war with the giants, Marika met with a man named Hoarah-Loux who would eventually serve as her consort. He was rather undignified, as he was both brutish and bloodthirsty. So he adopted the new name Godfrey and took upon his back a beast named Siraj, who was the vessel for his bloodthirsty rage. The two of them would then have 3 kids, Godwyn the Golden, Morgott, and Mohg. Morgott and Mohg were twins, and both born with the Omen curse, and thus were subjected to the same punishment as other Omens. But due to their royal status, they weren't treated as harshly, still being locked beneath the capital sewers for eternity though. Amid this happening, a war broke out called the Liurnian Wars, headed by their leaders Radahn in service of the Erdtree, and Rennala of the Carians and Academy. Neither side was gaining ground, so they offered to call a truce, and both the leaders would marry each other in order to cement this pact. They gave birth to 3 kids as well, Ranni, Rykard, and Radahn. Seemingly out of nowhere, though, Godfrey had lost the golden hue in his eyes, symbolizing his loss of grace. Those without the grace of the Erdtree are called tarnished and aren't welcome within the lands between. So Godfrey and the other tarnished are forced to leave the lands between and take the long march across the fog. We are considered by the game to be tarnished, but due to its RPG aspects, you're free to roleplay whatever your tarnished backstory was. Strangely, around the same time, Radahn divorced Rennala and left her for Marika. They then together had a few kids as well, mainly the twins Miquella and Malenia, who like the other twins were also cursed. Miquella was forever cursed with eternal youth, and Malenia was afflicted with scarlet rot, a disease that rots the skin, which ends up taking both her eyes and multiple limbs. What's strange about this relationship is that this may have been planned for a long time. Within the royal capital of Lindell is a statue of Radahn. If you read the message and perform the Law of Regression spell in front of it, the statue will magically change to Marika, with the message also changing, reading, Radahn is Marika. This is something hinted at all the way back in the intro. The first scene shows a person hammering an anvil twice. In the first swing, the person has breasts, with the second swing magically showing them removed. These are Marika and Radahn respectively, 2 beings occupying the same body. The question that continues to confuse the community is when this merge happened. Were Marika and Radahn always one person and magically split from each other only to come back later, or were they separate beings but only merged when they got together? We'll return to this moment later when we discuss the DLC, but a theory I subscribe to is that Radahn is a part of Marika that she removed from herself. But keep in mind, this is just a theory and not a fact. To keep it simple though, just know that Marika and Radahn were within one body when they gave birth to Malenia and Miquella. These group of 8 kids were then considered the demigods. It should be noted that Radahn and Rennala are not gods, only Marika is, meaning they just had kids, not demigod kids. But since Radahn and Marika got together, she was nice enough to elevate those kids to demigod status. Some of these kids, like Marika, would also be Empyrean, notably Malenia, Miquella, and Ranni, giving them the chance to succeed Marika and start their own order. As I said earlier, Empyreans are those selected by the 2 fingers, but the process by which they're selected is a bit confusing. Malenia's remembrance says, Miquella and Malenia are both the children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans. This implies that them being born of a single god is what gave them the Empyrean status. But Ranni was not only born by 2 parents, but neither were a god, so what gives? My theory is that single godhood is like an all-access premium pass to being an Empyrean. Or to put it another way, all those born of a single god are Empyrean, but not all Empyreans are born of a single god. Again, just speculation though, as what's more important is that these 3 have the chance to ascend to godhood. Marika also removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, which according to Miyazaki, the director behind the game, granted the demigods immortality. It also seems to have impacted the common everyday citizen within the lands between, as catacombs were constructed by the roots of the Erdtree to perform Erdtree burials. It's not particularly clear as far as I'm aware what these burials result in. Most people, myself included, seem to think that this means that death has no meaning to anyone in Elden Ring, especially since everyone looks like undead zombies. It is possible, however, that the Erdtree burials are a sign of respect, and something only the holiest and honorable among them can achieve. This could explain the myriad of gravesites and coffins that still persist throughout the land. It's not a right, but a privilege to have your body taken and absorbed into the Erdtree, so that your essence could continue to power its golden rays. This act caused a bit of a complication though, as some souls of the dead refused the call of the Erdtree, resulting in them living on as skeletons called those who live in death, something I'll discuss towards the end of the video. Regardless, removing the Rune of Death would almost permanently cement Marika and her offspring's rule, if not for the Night of the Black Knives. The Night of the Black Knives is the single most important date in Elden Ring's history, as it's the catalyst that created the current state of affairs in the lands between, and was the event that would be at the heart of numerous demigods' future actions. One day, a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen, this time by a group of women known as the Black Knife Assassins. Their lineage is rather interesting, however, as the Black Knife armor set says that they are Numen, who are the same stock as Marika. Rajer, an NPC we'll meet later, mentions they are also scions of the Eternal City. So if true, that means Marika, the Black Knife Assassins, Eternal City, and the Nox are somehow linked. To this day, no one has a clear answer. The DLC does elaborate on some of Marika's origins, so I doubt this is implying that Marika was a Nox or grew up in the Eternal Cities. Conversely, the Numen and the Nightfolk could just be simply descendants or loosely related to the Nox. The town of Sellia in Caelid is home to the Sellians, who according to Gowry are descendants of the Eternal City. There is even a boss fight between two Nox who are, unless I'm mistaken, the only two Nox above ground. The Nightfolk are certainly descendants or creations of the Nox due to their grey skin and silver blood, but the Numen could just be a relative or offshoot of the Nox. The Nox are known to sometimes ride ants into battle, and some of these ants can be found carrying Numen runes taken from the corpses found here in the Eternal Cities, so there is a connection here. Getting back to the story, these assassins would use the fragment of the Rune of Death to imbue their blades with the power that could kill the demigods. Godwyn was the first of the bunch to fall. During this time, another demigod, Ranni, slayed herself, divesting herself of her own flesh right when Godwyn was attacked. This caused a complication with their souls and bodies. Instead of both disappearing, each lost the other. Godwyn kept his body but lost his soul, while Ranni lost her body but kept her soul. The result is Ranni now inhabiting a blue doll, and Godwyn's body mutating into this grotesque creature found beneath Stormvale in the Deeproot Depths. These were the only confirmed casualties of the Night of the Black Knives, but there could have been more. Walking mausoleums throughout the lands between are said to house the remains of long-forgotten children of Queen Marika, but these demigods could have died at any point, not during the Night of the Black Knives. Marika, learning of her child's death, shattered the Elden Ring. Given this object makes up the land's fundamental laws, you can imagine shattering something like that will have some drastic consequences. Essentially, it was chaos. Queen Marika disappeared, and the demigods came out to claim runes for themselves, which itself turned into an all-out war, eventually leading to our arrival and the start of the game. That discussion was maybe a bit longer than I intended, but I hope this illustrates the past of Elden Ring. It's a much larger game compared to the previous Souls games, so there's much more lore and backstory than ever before. While many concepts from past Souls games have stayed, like the ancient dragons, Elden Ring has expanded these greatly. A larger map means more items, enemies, bosses, and locations, all of which can expand the storytelling that the Souls games are known for. This is especially true for the environments themselves. Elden Ring is unrivaled in its destructive beauty. The lands between was just hit with an earth-shattering war, and so the environment reflects this by showcasing the long-forgotten remnants of a battle once waged, or the flames and screens of a war still going. The corpse of Grandsass continues to take up space within the royal capital, Castle Morn is still overrun with misbegotten, and the corpse of the giants still linger. But even post-shattering, new wars have sprung up all over the place. Whether that's the hanging corpses around Limgrave, the scarlet rot that infests Caelid, or the new shadowy figures that stalk the streets at night. The lands between is a land that's been shaped by its past and present conflicts, and it's this part that I want to talk about next. Each of the demigods is still out there, each of their own plans, goals, and predicaments, and depending on who they are, they may also be the sole reason for the region's current conditions, and that is why, like Elden Ring itself, the lands between has become shattered, split into different distinct territories, each with its own problems and conflicts. The first locations, Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula, highlight this best. Limgrave's role in the broader narrative is establishment. Unlike the other areas where they have a more central focus on a current predicament, Limgrave has a bit of everything. The frequently mentioned Castle Morn displays the destruction of the misbegotten, and how easy it was for them to band together and overpower humans. There are even a few bizarre places like the Madness Village and the Minor Erdtree. It's two of the best levels in this game mechanically, as it provides the player with everything they will need, from Everjails and Catacombs to hidden secrets and merchants. It's all of Elden Ring's content condensed into 2 areas. Narratively, there isn't much to hold on to though, that is until you make it to the Legacy Dungeon to the northwest, Stormvale Castle. Stormvale houses the recently appointed Lord Godrick the Grafted. Godrick, despite technically being a demigod, was not part of our family tree, as he is only loosely related to the Golden lineage, those who are descendants of Marika and Godfrey. He is not a direct offspring of the two, but is somewhere within their line, along with his relative Godefroy, who was 100% made as an excuse to make more copies of bosses we've already fought. Due to the Shattering, he is one of the last, if not the last, of the Golden lineage, and what a sad way to end it. Despite being from the lineage that houses such great warriors like Godwyn the Golden, Slayer and Friend of Dragons, and Godfrey, first Elden Lord, Conqueror of Giants and all-around respected warrior, Godrick is nothing more than a coward.
I would take great care to avoid Godrick's tarnished hunts were I in your shoes. That depraved lot are obsessed with sacrificing tarnished like you for the sake of grafting. Honestly, Godrick's nothing more than a jumped-up country bumpkin. Lord? Oh, don't make me laugh. First, he hid himself amongst the womenfolk to flee the capital, then hid from Radahn in that castle. Then he insulted Malenia, lost to her in battle, only to lick her boots, rather than die like a man.
Losing to Malenia, I could sympathize with, but the fact he provoked her into a fight is moronic. Godrick isn't very strong by the look of things, but he is smart. Godrick seemed to realize that his body was too weak to pick fights, so he decided to partake in grafting. Depending on the definition, grafting can involve two different things, but both have the same outcome. There's skin grafting, which is a type of surgery that takes unnecessary skin and applies it to other more needed areas, a process mostly used in burn treatments among others. While the other refers to the grafting of two types of plants to create a hybrid, which comes with numerous benefits. Godrick's grafting is much the same, instead using human limbs and at one point the head of a dragon to graft onto his body. The process was something he started doing early on in his reign, but when thousands of tarnish started pouring in from the fog, well, as they say, business was booming. The entire castle has been turned into a massive grafting operation. Piles of corpses found throughout the castle either represent discarded parts that are no longer needed or bodies waiting to be selected. Grafted scions are occasionally seen within the castle and are likely some of Godrick's experiments. They're an amalgamation of various limbs, some of which even include wings and feathers from different birds, all grafted together to support their large body. One of the more significant details found within Stormvale, though, is that most of the enemies within its walls are exiled or banished knights. Godrick does have his own knights, though, but they're simply called Godrick's Knights, but consider the wording there. Most, if not all, the knights in the game have armor denoting the lineage to their region, like Redmane or Raya Lucaria. Godrick is the only one with soldiers loyal to him, showing that those who served Stormvale Castle in the past are long gone. But the other set of knights shows us that, like him, they were shunned and cast aside. Banished knights are knights who lost their land in prior wars and now no longer have an allegiance. In the exile were those who were forced to be in penal colonies, which are places made to house prisoners and undesirables, so that they don't take up space in the settlement with the well-respected folk. Optimistically, I'd like to think that Godrick took them in as he saw how poorly he was treated as the runt of the litter within the Golden lineage. But I'd also imagine that they only joined him because they had nowhere else to go, and it's better him than nothing. Perfectly showcasing the downfall of not only Stormvale, but the Golden lineage. I wonder what Godfrey would think if he could see it himself. Unlike Stormvale and the surrounding area, where signs of war are simply ashes and remnants of past battles, Liurnia is still in the midst of one when we arrive. Liurnia houses two groups, the Carian royal family and the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Each of these was allied with one another under the rule of one Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. Her mastery of magic enchanted those of the Academy, allowing her a spot among the Academy's greatest scholars. Magic within Elden Ring is much more complicated than it seems. Incantations are based on faith, usually as a result of some ritual. That's why lots of incantations come from religious groups, like Golden Order fundamentalism or the Ancient Dragon Cult. So if incantations are more faith-based, then sorceries would be more science-based. The founding Rain of Stars spell explains that an astrologer one day looked up upon the stars and glimpsed what was known as the primeval current. Following this event, glintstone would fall from the sky, giving birth to the eventual study of glintstone. See, the stars are not simply stars as we know them, as they're said to govern fate. The Amber Starlight item says that the stars command fate, while the Amber Stars command the fate of the gods. The stars are also considered living beings. Falling star beasts and estelles are beings that came from the stars and crashed here in the lands between. With the limitless practice that glintstone gave, though, it's only fair that an institution would be created to supervise this practice. The Academy of Raya Lucaria was established for this very purpose, serving as a testing ground for those to learn spells and create new ones. Each student would be encouraged to dabble in whatever magics they chose and would be given a crown symbolizing the head of one of the scholars. Each crown denotes what type of magic that student is learning, such as comets and meteors, but other crowns were given to those with different jobs. Students who would travel across the lands would wear Herodas's crown, while those who seek to end conflict would don Haima's. Numerous sorcerers flocked from all over to join and learn the ways of Glintstone, but not everyone was respected. Some sorcerers looked for that primeval current. They wanted to fully understand the limitless potential that Glintstone gave, but would ultimately pay the price for it. Sorcerers Lusat and Azur, in an attempt to commune with the primeval current, had their skulls melded together with large crystals situated on their head. But what they saw broke them. The abyss they briefly glimpsed into made them fearful. An NPC by the name of Selon attempts to follow in their footsteps, but if you aid her in this request, she will turn into a mass of graven mages. This seems to be the intended outcome. Sort of, as you need to collect the bodies of the aforementioned sorcerers to continue the quest, but maybe the form she was given as a result of the experiment wasn't intended and is what occurs when the experiment fails. All that being said, it's pretty clear that the Academy encourages experimentation, as long as it's not the primeval current. This is further evidenced by the warrior jars seen scattered throughout the campus grounds, who are likely being used in experiments of some kind. This is in stark contrast to the Carian Manor, who focused more on royalty, tradition, and status. While those of the Academy look to the stars, the Carians look toward the moon. There isn't a major difference here, to be clear, it's just another school of magic. But both groups for a time were united under their shared love for sorceries, in whatever manner they came in. When the Shattering started, the Academy announced that they wouldn't be partaking in the war and shut themselves off from the rest of the lands between. Surprisingly, it seems like everyone obeyed, as there are no signs of war or battle with other groups. But in retrospect, it was only a matter of time. The Academy seemed keen on waging war, and would do so after the Shattering as they attacked the Carian Manor. They also locked Rennala in the Academy's study, which despite sounding like a difficult task was rather simple as she was still heartbroken over her breakup with Radahn. The Carians came ready to fight and even planned ahead by creating the Carian Retaliation spell, which turns captured magic into glint blades. It was only then, as the item itself puts it, that the moon and the stars would one day go their separate ways. Across Liurnia are the remnants of this war, with some battles still being played out as we arrive. Camps and outposts are built along the roads, and soldiers of both factions are seen duking it out. While the Academy seems to fight from afar, the Carians aren't afraid to get down and dirty. Spells like Slicer, Piercer, and Greatsword all center around getting up close and personal, and in an attempt to add to their numbers, they've seemingly captured some of the knights and used them as puppets. These summons that appear on the rooftops wear the same armor as the Academy's knights, and we know that puppetry is quite common within Carian culture thanks to Celavis and Pydia. Members of the Academy seem to have allied themselves with the Manor too. These Academy scholars are wearing the Lazuli Glintstone crown, which is meant to represent those that believe that the moon and stars are equal. It seems as though they viewed the moon more favorably than the stars, as they're seen defending the manor. The Academy is not without its strengths though, as it has completely cut itself off from the rest of the world, requiring the use of a Glintstone key to enter. Even if the Carians could enter, not only are the sorcerers posted all over the halls, but the Academy has fashioned marionettes. Dolls that, like their opposition's puppets, are sworn to serve their masters. The only buildings that still remain amongst the wreckage are the Carian Study Hall, the Carian Manor, and the Academy itself. The latter two continue to remain cut off from the rest, either through a literal key or illusion magic. Rennala, bless her heart, has received some rather unfair treatment because of this. As I said, she was locked in the Grand Library and was unwilling to fight back as she was too heartbroken over Radahn.
The great and beautiful full moon witch. Sadly, her heart was broken when Lord Radahn left her. And then, when the Academy rebelled against the royals, she was locked away in the Grand Library. In the end, Lady Rennala was left alone, cradling the amber egg Lord Radahn bequeathed her.
Even today, she's still not over him. A statue of him is proudly displayed in the back of the room, and a red wolf of Radahn still walks the halls of the Academy. Heartbroken and left alone, she now tends to the amber egg so that she could birth her new sweetings. Creating children of all things, though, is quite a specific detail, and I do wonder if it's because she misses her kids, and in turn misses the marriage that came before them, and so out of desperation decides to create more kids to take care of, hoping that they will shower her with the love that she no longer receives. When the first phase is over, the second phase starts with a cloud of smoke, as Ranni, her daughter, tells us to leave Rennala alone. What we fight is an apparition of Rennala, a version of her at her peak, back when she was rightfully crowned Queen of the Full Moon. If you defeat this phase, you'll learn that it was just an illusion and that Rennala is fine. This is why, out of all the bosses, I'm so glad we didn't kill Rennala. Just like Priscilla from Dark Souls 1, she hasn't wronged us in any way. She's just a deeply depressed mother who's trying to get over a nasty breakup. She lost her husband, hasn't talked to her kids in quite a long time, has a title that likely means nothing in this day and age, and is no longer able to practice her sorcery and look up at her moon. One day when all of this is over, I do hope she'll realize that she doesn't need Radahn anymore and can make her triumphant return and become that carrying queen we briefly saw. The one who wielded the magic of the moon and stars, who can one day not only reunite these celestial bodies and bring the Academy and the Manor back together, but mend her heart back together too. If any place in the lands between is still reeling from the effects of the shattering, it's Caelid. You can't go 3 feet without seeing some direct result of the battle that took place here. The whole region has been infested with scarlet rot thanks to the fight between Radahn and Malenia. Briefly shown in one of the game's old reveal trailers, both Radahn and Malenia fought to a standstill with both taking significant damage. Malenia, attempting to end the fight, blossomed, causing the Aeonian flower to bloom and scarlet rot to flood the nearby region. We'll talk about Malenia and her condition a bit more later, but it was the major catalyst for Caelid's current condition. There isn't a single place here left untouched by the scarlet rot, from as high as the cliffs to the depths of each cave. Almost every inch of this place is covered in this white fungus that has parasitically attached itself to every living flora in the region. Wildlife too has been permanently altered, with dogs and crows increasing in size and strength, equally withered from the effects of the rot. The central swamp has toxic rot both in gaseous and liquid forms that pollute the area. The town of Celia has been damaged as well, with its inhabitants using magic to hide from the conflict. Those 2 knocks that we briefly talked about earlier are found here in the town but locked behind a magic barrier. It's a stretch, but given the townspeople are descendants of the Knocks, I wonder if they erected the barrier to protect them specifically. But the one who suffered the most in this conflict has been Radahn himself. Being at the epicenter of the explosion, he received the most damage, with his body currently deteriorating, while his great rune attempts to fight back the spread of the scarlet rot. There is a gross beauty to be found here, and speaks to how well done the environments of Elden Ring are. Both the art direction and design of each region are top-notch, some of the best I've ever seen, with Caelid, as hostile as it is, being at the top. While every location in Elden Ring has the vibes of a worn-down land overrun by war, Caelid feels alien, like we've stepped into a completely different vibe. It's like walking through a nuclear apocalypse, seeing the land as it is and wondering what it was. This speaks to a larger question about how much of this place is from the rot and not just overtaken by it. What was Caelid before all this? Was the swamp a part of the region and the rot just infested it, or did the swamp appear because of the rot? It's kinda scary to imagine. Due to its hostile nature, the place has been quarantined. The road leading here is blocked by a large barrier, meant to keep those that are inside from escaping and those from the outside from adding to the death count. Since then, a large-scale counterattack has been put in place, headed by the Redmane soldiers under General Radahn. Unlike the other soldiers who are busy fighting a war or preparing for one, the soldiers of Redmane Castle have essentially been on cleanup duty. Squads of soldiers are seen throughout the land, likely either functioning as hit squads dealing with the wildlife or cleanup crews trying to figure out how to remove the rot. Those who are dealing with the wildlife are usually accompanied by flame chariots or wielding fire themselves. The flame spell, Flame Grant Me Strength, can also be found here too, so fire seems to be the most effective means of cleaning out the rot. To make matters worse though, not only are there still signs of Malenia's Clean Rot Knights, with most of them either patrolling the swamp or engaging in conflict with the Redmane, but new wildlife has appeared as a result of the rot. The Mushroom Men seem to have fungi growing on their bodies, similar to the fungus engulfing the flora, but the other description also calls them vestments, which is another name for a robe or cloak that clergymen would wear. This connects to the other part of the description, which mentions how long ago Great Lords used to serve the scarlet rot, so the fungal headpieces serve as crowns. The other species, the Kindred of Rot, are insects that were born of rot. As such, they worship it as a divine entity, and see the goddess of rot Malenia as their god. The Kindred of Rot spirit ashes mention, however, that while they are servants of the goddess of rot, they were forsaken and unwanted, implying that Malenia doesn't care for these creatures, something I'll delve more into when we discuss her soon. The soldiers of Caelid certainly have their work cut out for them, but they are dedicated without question. Their armor set says that they burn the crest on their armor to show their resolve, full well knowing that none of them would ever return to their homes and will likely die amongst the fungus and pox that seep out of every corner. Their dedication to the land is just as strong as their dedication to Radahn, as they can't let him die in vain, and want him to go out like the warrior that he is. So Redmane Castle is hosting a festival, encouraging warriors from all over to battle against one of the greatest warriors of the Shattering. Radahn's one of the best fights in the game to me, both from a mechanical and narrative perspective. You're able to summon the other contestants to fight alongside you, and it makes for a real spectacle. It also shows just how strong Radahn is. While he's gone through a whole host of buffs and nerfs over the years, he's still a competitive fight even with the summons. Assuming it uses the same system as the previous Souls games, the bosses will gain more health the more summons you bring to the fight. It's a mechanic used to balance the fight out a little, so it's not a complete steamroll. But all of the summons for this fight are in the arena, so Radahn never gets a health increase. So even with all these allies fighting beside you, Radahn still takes a bit of time to go down. I mean, yeah, the fight is still pretty simple with the summons, especially since you can resummon them multiple times, but it's one of those fights that I can never solo simply because the prospect of having a band of warriors fighting a demigod is way too cool to pass up. Radahn isn't going down without a fight though. He'll ride his horse around the arena, use various gravity spells, and even launch himself into the ground from the sky like some kind of missile. Most hilarious about this is that the 3-ton guy somehow able to ride his horse is brought up in his item descriptions. It's actually one of the few parts about Radahn that the game explicitly mentions. Radahn loves his horse, but as he got older he realized that he couldn't ride his horse as the weight was too much for its scrawny frame. So he learned gravity magic in order to reduce his weight. His teacher was an alabaster lord, which is rather important as Radahn was also able to suspend the stars in the sky. The reason he stopped them was likely at the behest of the alabaster lord in the town of Celia where he learned the magic. As we recently discussed, these stars are living beings, and the alabaster lords along with their onyx counterparts are said to have been born when a meteor hit the ground. So it's fair to assume that the lords knew what lurked out there in the depths of space, and wanted Radahn to stop them. And their destructive power is not to be messed with. Each falling star beast is fought within a crater and is assumed to be where they landed when crashing into the ground. And the remembrance of Estelle says that it destroyed an eternal city and took away their sky. While the only 2 eternal cities of the Nox are Nokron and Noxtella, the Deep-Root Depths contains a 3rd eternal city, notably missing its sky, only for it to be found above Estelle within the boss room. The Star Scourge heirloom says that Radahn confronted the stars alone, and thus did he crush them. This implies that the falling star beasts and Estelle's fell down to Earth only to be stopped by Radahn, forcing them to stay in the sky because of his presence. It reminds me a lot of Sekiro's plot where Ashina Castle couldn't be overtaken because of Ishin's power. Both were so dangerous that the world itself could not advance or evolve with them still present. To me, that is just insane, and again credit to Elden Ring's impressive storytelling as you can see this represented in-game, as despite the rock consuming his mind, he's still able to keep the stars at bay and still apply gravity magic to himself, all while fighting us, demonstrating why he's considered the most fearsome warrior of the Shattering. Rounding out the first half of demigods is Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. What's cool about Rykard is that he's one of the rare few who's actively going against the Golden Order. Neither of the previous demigods, to be fair, have expressed their gratitude for the Golden Order, but it's fair to assume that at the very least they don't mind it. Rykard despises the Greater Will, the Erdtree, and anything to do with the Golden Order. Praetor Rykard found it insulting that the gods would rather watch over the lands between during the Shattering while expecting the demigods to fight for power. So he decided to take his anger to the source and announce a war against the Golden Order. His first act of violence was against the forces of Lindell, which as of now still has no clear victor. There is a strange lack of Gelmir infantry on the front lines though. All the soldiers are once pledged to the royal capital. There are no Gelmir or Rykard knights anywhere, not even their bodies. There is a Gelmir knight set, but it was found deep in a hero grave, and specifically points out that it was armor worn by soldiers once loyal to Rykard. Some excellent foreshadowing of the events soon to come. Replacing these soldiers are abductor virgins. As their name implies, they're used to capture people, although your sexual experience is inconsequential as they offer no quarter to anyone. The design seems to be based on the Iron Maiden torture device, a large steel coffin with spikes on the inside. These aren't specific to Rykard, mind you, as you could find these inside the academy of Raya Lucaria, but he seems to be their main employer. This may be related to Rykard's past, as a prominent invader at the Volcano Manor is Giza. She wields a wheel similar in shape to the one used by the abductor virgins, and her outfit and rags show that she was once an executioner. This combined with the numerous torture devices and cages behind the manor shows that Rykard was and still is interrogating people either for information, or pleasure, or maybe both. As I said earlier though, the war that transpired is unending. Battles are still being waged by the time we arrive, and it's an extremely gruesome scene. It seems like Rykard wants to not only defeat his enemies but send a message. These effigies hung around the main roads are a very easy way to tell someone not to enter the premises. The use of the abductor virgins and their various deadly weapons reinforces that Rykard is not simply looking to win, he wants them to suffer. Either meet the end of a spiked wheel or be tortured till you can no longer take it. The house wins either way. And yet despite all his power, a winner has not been crowned. Thus, while Rykard sits back and relaxes, hundreds of Lindell soldiers are suffering from the effects of the war, one with no end in sight. Hoping to tip the scales in his favor, Rykard made his way to Mount Gelmir where the giant serpent lay, and fed himself and his great rune to the large beast. The serpent used to be revered before Rykard's arrival. The back parts of the Volcano Manor have statues built with the design of a serpent, but some seem to have opposed it as well. As the Serpent Hunter, the weapon we will eventually use to defeat Rykard, says that it was used to hunt an immortal serpent in the distant past. Eventually it would meet with Rykard post-Shattering and both would gain unimaginable power. But just as he was granted strength, so too was he granted gluttony. Rykard was a vicious lord, both to his servants and those who were unfortunate enough to face his devices in combat. We've already seen the destruction he caused, but now he's partners with an immortal serpent, so it can only get worse. Thousands upon thousands of bodies can be seen piled up, hung, and burned. A ghost nearby puts it quite well, saying that if this putrid field of death is Rykard's work, then he no longer abides. Those who were loyal to Rykard realized what horrors he was willing to commit and no longer felt the urge to serve their lord. This lost Rykard a lot of support, all except one, his proprietress, Tanith, who not only stayed by his side when he turned against the Golden Order, but was more infatuated with him than ever when he became one with the serpent. Really takes "would you love me if I was a worm" to the next level, huh? Low on men, Rykard needed assistance. Fortunately, he wasn't the only one who disliked the Golden Order, and soon his manor became a hub for all those willing to fight against the Erdtree. But they too haven't been told the full truth. Rykard's hiding something. Well, a lot of somethings actually. One of the guests here at the manor is Rya. She is Tanith's daughter, which is why she is here at the manor despite not looking like a hardened warrior like Bernal. But she too isn't being told the full truth, not just of the manor, but even her existence. During a conversation with her, she'll mention how she can hear noises in the walls but can't quite understand why. Breaking the wall reveals a hidden passageway that leads to the back of the manor. Here is where the true horror of Rykard's gluttony and savagery can be found. Throughout the ruins of these past settlements are man-serpents. When Rykard and the serpent merged, they were able to give birth to these beings through some form of ritual. Rya, real name Zarias, was one of these creations, as she ends up revealing her serpent form to us by accident. Confronting Tanith confirms that she lied, and that she's nothing more than her adopted mother. Zarias' mother seems to be Daedakar, as she drops the talisman Daedakar's Woe, in which it says that she indulged in all forms of adultery and wicked pleasures imaginable, giving birth to a myriad of grotesque children. Among the man-serpents are also the aforementioned abductors, but also quite a few Albinarics, an Omen Killer, Godskin, and a Black Flame Monk to boot. The Albinarics seem to be merely used for the sake of torture. There are only first-gen Albinarics in these rooms who are strung up and constrained within these torture devices, with only one second-generation Albinaric lying near a guillotine with its head appearing as a lootable item. The others don't have any specific in-game reasoning for being here, but given Rykard is going against the Golden Order, it makes sense why the Godskin and Monk are among the ranks. The Omen Killer, similarly, may have decided to ally himself with Rykard, as like the Godskins, many of them are forging their own paths and can be found at different places throughout the lands between. This isn't that much of a stretch to be fair, as an Omen Killer was hired by Gideon to find the Haley-Tree Medallion within the Albinaric village, another place that notably has no omen. All of this is hidden from the members of the manor, likely to prevent another mass exodus of forces. As such, Rykard and Tanith not only keep this hidden, but even the soldiers' roles within the manor too. Being an ally to Rykard is merely a contract job, not a career. Rykard's recruits were called recusants, a title we could be granted as well should we partake in the quest line. A recusant must hunt their own kind. As Tarnished, we are to hunt other Tarnished, those who believe in the faith of the hopeless Golden Order. Doing so will curry favor with both Rykard and Tanith. Earning enough renown will grant us an audience of Rykard, but we aren't supposed to survive. The entire area is littered with bodies, corpses of long-dead champions, and recusants who all gave their lives to Rykard, more often than not unwillingly, also that they could be a part of his family. Rykard wants power. He is a slave to it, and thinks that consuming the power of his dead champions will grant him more of what he desires. What could be passed off as a gameplay limitation, it is odd that the manor is only filled with a handful of members, despite this supposedly being a haven for those against the Erdtree. But now we know why. Hundreds, thousands even, were willing to lay their life on the line in service of their shared goal, only to be betrayed by their leader. One thing I really like about this reveal is that while not common, the same fate can happen to you too. I assume most players took the portal leading to the boss room behind the manor, but if you follow through with the quest, you could skip this portion entirely. This does require you to kill Morgott, then head to the mountaintops to challenge Juno Hoslow, something I, again, assume most people probably didn't do until later in their playthrough. Nevertheless, you can do the quest this way, which I can imagine would come as quite the shock. I mean, it's Elden Ring. Anything remotely resembling someone important is going to be a boss, and the fog wall definitely gives it away. But I do appreciate the effort to flesh out this alternative outcome for the few that achieved it this way. Especially since those same players may have killed Rykard and left, not even knowing that there was an entire dungeon right behind them, hidden away as was intended. Defeating Rykard shows, however, that the Serpent's tale is far from over. After hearing of her lord's death, Tanith made her way to the boss arena in order to consume him. She seems to be doing this with the hope that, like the Serpent, Rykard will live on but within her. The serpent ate Rykard and yet was able to live on it, and now Tanith has consumed a serpentine Rykard, so it's possible that he will one day be reborn through her. We never get the chance to see the result of this act. Rykard is a growing boy after all, so Tanith has quite a bit to sift through, but I find that it perfectly displays her dedication to Rykard. She was utterly charmed by his presence when they first met, and she's never taken her eyes off him since. She is willing to do whatever it takes to see Rykard's vision through to the end, even if that means eating his corpse. With that amount of devotion, maybe one day in the distant future, the two of them really will devour the gods together, as a family. These 4 bosses make up the first set of Shardbearers. Claiming a minimum of 2 of their great runes is required to enter the Altus Plateau in the royal capital of Lindell. Already something is amiss within the capital. All throughout Lindell are perfumers whose armor set states that they are respected and blessed apothecaries. Apothecaries are places that sell medicine and drugs, so these perfumers were likely taking care of the sick and dying, but why? Also around Lindell are buildings covered in this sticky orange substance. It looks eerily similar to the corpse wax used by the valiant gargoyles. Their weapons state that they are repaired using the wax of long-dead champions. Assuming this is the same substance, then they sealed the buildings using corpse wax. But again, why? They are still in the midst of a war, but I feel like sealing people in their homes during a war that's presumably lasted years, if not decades, is not the best course of action. It's also possible that a sickness has broken out and that's why the perfumers are here too, but there doesn't seem to be a clear-cut answer. Beneath this wondrous city are the decrepit sewers housing all the omen they imprisoned. FromSoft has replicated this idea in numerous other titles, and it's by far one of my favorite reoccurring story beats. Class division and social status are common across the Souls games, but instead of stating it through item descriptions or giving off a suggestion that there is a division in power, FromSoft usually separates these places with literal space between them. Beneath the undead burg of Dark Souls 1 is the Depths, which is where the banished citizens go. Further down than them, however, are the citizens of Blighttown, which seem to be a place for those even worse off than those of the Depths. Similarly, Demon Souls World 5 is also a place of defilement, where the undesirables of the kingdom are placed. What separates these places are literal walls, meters of distance, and sometimes even a massive door with a lock. The omen within Lindell are much the same. It's meant to symbolize the harsh nature of this world and how those not considered important to the kingdom are thrown away. Not outcasted, but pushed down. These locations usually contain the bulk of the kingdom's trash, further symbolizing how they are no different than garbage. They are left to fester and rot while the people of the upper regions metaphorically walk all over them as they go about their business. Even post-shattering, these omen are still down here, forced to never see the sky again. One of them managed to make it out though, but their escape is the reason for the other's continued captivity. That would be the boss of this area, Morgott the Omen King. What sets him apart from other bosses we've discussed so far is that not only is he Omen, but we've already met him numerous times. One of the first bosses in the game is Morgott the Fell Omen. He'll die only to ambush us in the Altus Plateau, only to come back again but now as Morgott. It's important to note that these two are the same person, but you might initially raise an eyebrow to that. How is an Omen not only a lord, but a lord of the royal capital? I mean, there are literal Omen just a few feet beneath the ground, so how? Simply put, no one knows. YouTuber Sekiro Dubi has a video showcasing a cut questline of an NPC called Shanehaight. Sekiro Dubi has a wealth of cut content posted on his channel, so if you're curious about some of the lesser known parts of Elden Ring, I can't recommend him enough. I also won't speak on the quest too much so as to not take away from his excellent video, so we'll leave it down below if you want to check out the full questline. Essentially, Shanehaight is someone of royalty who talks highly of their lord until he spirals out of control after learning of their lord's true appearance. Morgott hid his identity from those of the capital, as omens are still viewed unfavorably even post-shattering. That's why he was forced to don the fake persona Morgott, as it would allow him to hunt freely without exposing his true identity. He also employed a band of knights called the Knights Cavalry who stalked the roads of the lands between during the night. This is all rather strange, as despite everything that's happened thanks to him being Omen, he's arguably more dedicated to the Golden Order than any other demigod. Morgott has an immense amount of self-hatred. He hates his Omen blood, seeing it as a curse. His weapon, the cursed sword, was formed from his accursed blood, showing that he kept it hidden at all costs. He hates his siblings for being traitors to the Golden Order, and even curses us during the second phase for forcing him to release his hideous blood across the sacred ground of the Elden Throne. He is in love with an order that doesn't love him back, and he's only the Lord of Lindell on a technicality and that no one knows he is their lord. This self-hatred for both him and his kind resulted in him continuing to uphold the values of the Golden Order. The Omen are still confined to the sewers, forced to never see the surface, and an Omen killer is even stationed next to the entrance just in case. This is the one time the Omen could be free of the Golden Order's oppression, and yet Morgott still sees them like the common citizen would see him. Even when we defeat Morgott and ascend the steps that lead to the Erdtree, we find out that he, nor we, can even enter. His dialogue implies that he wanted to claim the title as well, but was rejected like we were. So he not only attempted to be the Elden Lord of the Golden Order, but even after he was rejected, he still continues to play favorites with it and upholds its rule. The Golden Order can do no wrong in Morgott's eyes. The same order who again would see him as a stain on the earth, the same order started by his mother that put him in the sewers. That's because the Golden Order is all he has. It was probably the only thing worth grabbing onto in his small confined world. Morgott since birth was punished for his Omen horns. As a child, I can imagine that this punishment felt strange to him. Why, he might have asked. Why is this my fate? What did I do to deserve this? Morgott likely wanted to find a reason for his pain, but can't come to terms with the fact that this pain was dealt without reason, and so creates a false narrative that he's the problem when that couldn't be further from the truth. So contrast this mindset with his twin brother Mohg, who not only dislikes the Golden Order but loves his Omen blood, seeing it as anything but a curse. Mohg wants to start his own dynasty called the Mohgwyn dynasty. Like his brother, he too was locked beneath the sewers along with his own set of shackles. Except while sitting down there suffering in pain, he was contacted by the Formless Mother. The Formless Mother is an outer god. To briefly revisit our list of terms, we have demigods. These include the offspring of our known parents. Within these demigods are Empyreans. These are individuals who are chosen by the two fingers who could choose to become gods. These include Malenia, Miquella, and Ranni. Above that is a god, who is Marika, an Empyrean who ascended to godhood. But now we have the last term being outer god. Now despite sounding stronger, it's not as cut and dry as it seems. The major weakness of the outer gods is that they need envoys to carry out their bidding, as they aren't present in the lands between. Going off the H.P. Lovecraft definitions again, an outer god is a cosmic entity that resides in deep space far away from Earth. So the Formless Mother is only as strong as Mohg, as it can't directly influence the lands between, only provide the power to do so. As such, communication requires a communion of sorts. The Formless Mother specifically requires a wound. Throughout the boss fight, Mohg will channel the power of the Formless Mother by either piercing or grabbing the air, only for blood to erupt from it. Due to its limited influence, it's hard to get a grasp on what it wants, if it even wants anything in the first place. These beings are without form, so they might not be like actual people with agendas and plans. That said, there is a lot of imagery surrounding the Formless Mother that could give us a hint as to what its motivations are. The Formless Mother has many allusions to childbirth, menstruation, and femininity. It's specifically called a mother, which is an interesting choice, but its power stems from blood. We'll see some of her influence more in the DLC, but the Blood Fiends and Mohg all deal with blood. So it's not just some coincidence, blood is her power. This obsession with blood made me think of menstruation, the monthly occurrence in which the uterine lining is shed, causing women to bleed. This could explain the wounding process involved in the communion, as any woman will tell you that periods are quite painful. To further add to this, Miquella was taken out of a cocoon and placed in this egg, as Miquella is seen outside of it in the intro. This egg reminds me of a woman's ovaries, which only came to me due to the fact that the altar is situated on what looks like a pelvis. All of this points to some form of rebirth using the power of the Formless Mother, which I'll discuss in just a moment. But hopefully you could see how these real-life connections explain the nature of the Formless Mother. But even then, I also think it explains her motivations. The Formless Mother only communes with those of accursed blood, that being Mohg and the Blood Fiends of the DLC, who are both subjugated and beaten down by society. It's possible then that the Formless Mother is giving love to those who never receive it, as nothing is more heartwarming than a mother's love. Or it's again just using real-life connections as symbolism, as something I have recently learned is that menstruation is often called the curse, which could explain her willingness to commune with those of accursed blood, as the two share a curse connection. Regardless, our previous discussion about the Empyreans is actually rather important to Mohg's goal, as instead of ruling alone, he decided to capture his half-brother Miquella, in the hope that he would rule his dynasty while Mohg rules as his consort. Mohg could not become a god due to not being granted the Empyrean status. Ranni and Malenia are not only MIA, but are communing with their own beings, the Dark Moon and Outer God of Rot respectively, so they're taken, leaving Miquella as the only option. Now the DLC does recontextualize this moment quite a bit, so we'll revisit this later, but at its core, Mohg wants to create a dynasty within the lands between, one that is bathed in blood instead of gold. To help further this goal, he has recruited people of all kinds to serve as his henchmen. His main forces are the Sanguine Nobles and Bloody Fingers. Each one is a deadly adversary that seeks to spread the accursed blood of the dynasty across the land. One of his more well-known members is Vare, the first NPC you'll meet in the game. He was a war surgeon whose main duty was to deliver killing blows and put people out of their misery. But he was kidnapped by Lord Mohg along with a few others, but he was the only one able to channel the power of Mohg's blood. Along with them is a strangely large congregation of Albinarics. Mohgwyn's palace is located in the western region of the consecrated snowfields, while Miquella's Haylig Tree is to the north. This is notable because many Albinarics believe that the Haylig Tree was a place of salvation for their people. So either the Albinarics comically got lost on the way to the Haylig Tree, and honestly that's fair, the snowfields is a pain in the ass to navigate, or some of the Albinarics decided to fight against the Golden Order as revenge for the pain they've suffered. Regarding the actual dynasty itself, it seems like Mohg usurped it from the previous owner, or it was abandoned and Mohg just strolled on through. There was a lot of ancient imagery in these ruins, with symbols and hieroglyphics not seen in many other places. The ruins also have a central figure of some kind, this old man with a book, as statues of him are seen all over the Mohgwyn Palace. This same statue was also found in a few other ruins like Ul and Old. The same enemy types called Claymen can be found here too, and seem to be connected to the Bubble sorceries. According to its description, they served as priests during an ancient dynasty, like the one under our mysterious man. Given this place's nature and design though, it's hard not to think of this as an evil domain. Everyone we meet genuinely seems sick in the head and insane. The DLC will again show us another side of this dynasty, by showing us that not everyone was deranged and wanted to bathe in the blood of their enemies. But Mohgwyn Palace is certainly an evil place regardless. Which is why the silver lining is that Mohg has possibly the least amount of influence out of all the demigods. His area is extremely small, only taking about 15 minutes to walk through, and the entire dynasty hinges on Miquella being reborn as a god under the power of the Formless Mother. But as the DLC will show, Miquella is currently busy and has no plans on returning Mohg's calls anytime soon, leaving the fate of Mohg and his dynasty in perpetual stasis. This then brings us to the last demigods, which are the twins Miquella and Malenia. Like the prior demigods, they too seek to establish a better order than the one of gold. The reason for Miquella's resistance against the Golden Order is partially due to his sister. He used to practice Golden Order fundamentalism, a religious sect of the Golden Order that seeks to understand and discuss the elements of the Golden Order. During his time, he was able to create a few spells, mainly the Discus of Light, Triple Rings of Light, and Radahnn's Rings of Light. But he would ultimately leave the Order as none of their teachings were able to help cure his sister Malenia of her rot. The last spell says that this was the beginning of the unalloyed gold. Unalloyed is the opposite of alloy, which is a mix of metals, so unalloyed would be a non-mix of metals, leaving the metal pure, implying that Miquella is seeking to forge his own path away from the gold of the Golden Order. This is further evidenced by Miquella's own needle, which is said to ward off the meddling of outer gods and is thought to be capable of forestalling the incurable scarlet sickness. As for his sister, Malenia would challenge Radahn and Caelid, resulting in the toxic nuking of the region. That's because Malenia was infected with scarlet rot, a disease from another outer god aptly called the Outer God of Rot. But long ago, the Outer God of Rot was sealed within the Lake of Rot by a blind swordsman, which explains the toxic nature of the area. But it still seems like it has some sort of power, as this was presumably before it infected Malenia, but the timelines of each event aren't particularly clear. Once her fight with Radahn ended, she passed out from exhaustion and one of her knights had to carry her all the way back to the Haylig Tree, which is quite the walk. The Haylig Tree is located to the north of the consecrated snowfields. To enter, the Tarnished must complete a puzzle inside the town of Ordina. The town itself is abandoned, but the puzzle lies hidden within the Everjail. Everjails are seen all over the lands between, and while their creators and placements are still unclear, a constant among them is that they seem to house prisoners. In this case, the town is hidden so as to obscure the Haylig Tree's entrance. Miquella used his own blood to grow the tree, but it never reached the potential the Erdtree had. This was all but set in stone when Mohg took him out of the Haylig Tree, leaving it little more than a husk. Despite that, the twins are some of the rare few who are revered across the lands between, and not just by their soldiers. The Haylig Tree over time became known as a safe haven for those shunned by society under the Golden Order. Much of the inhabitants are demi-humans, misbegotten, and Albinarics. The women of the Albinarics are seen outside defending the entrance along with a few Black Knife assassins. Similarly, there are also 2 Haima scholars and a Carian knight named Loretta, all who seem to be under the service of Miquella. Haima scholars seek to quell conflict, and may have joined up with Miquella to prevent conflict from spreading to the Haylig Tree. The Black Knife assassins may have also joined Miquella to help protect this land as well, but they also might be attempting to get into the Haylig Tree to kill him. And Loretta used to be a Carian knight, but became increasingly concerned with the Albinaric's treatment, so she decided to find a suitable place for them to live without threat, and deemed the Haylig Tree to be the best option. A Carian knight caring for Albinarics this much is rather strange, which gave rise to a rumor that she too was an Albinaric. And while the evidence is circumstantial at best, it's important to note that all the Albinaric women we meet have lost function in their legs and wield bow and arrows. and Loretta is only ever seen on horseback and uses spells to cast a bow and arrow. Along with all these inhabitants are these strange beings with golden horns. These guys are called Oracle Envoys, and their Ash description says that they appear when heralding in the arrival of a new god or age. We only seem to find them here and at the royal capital. The royal capital is next to the Erdtree, which houses the Elden Throne, so that's expected. The Erdtree is home to the twins, both of whom are Empyrean, beings who can succeed Marika, which explains their presence here. But while Miquella may be loved by many, Malenia isn't without her admirers too. Her greatest admirer seems to be the head of House Murray. Murray is the lord of the Shaded Castle and became infatuated with Malenia due to her undying dedication. See, the sons of House Murray are notably born with a lifelong disease like Malenia. But seeing this fierce warrior battle strong foes and watch over the Erdtree all while dealing with an eternal sickness was inspiring to them. As such, the house honors Malenia with a portrait in the main room. It's unclear if Malenia was aware of this veneration though. There are clean rot knights walking the path of the castle, so she may have been in contact with them, but that's just speculation. Along with being revered by many, Miquella seems to have revered some of his older brothers as well, most notably Godwyn. Within the Erdtree are a few statues of two young children. A misbegotten can be seen lying in front of it, which leads me to believe that this is a statue of young Miquella and Malenia. However, in Loretta's boss room there is a statue of 3 people, with one person being noticeably taller than the twins. I currently believe this to be Godwyn. A weapon called the Golden Epitaph reads, "A sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die," infused with the humble prayer of a young boy. "Oh brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." This young boy seems to be referring to Miquella, and this prayer is him hoping that Godwyn will die a true death, not remain the fish blob he became in the deep-root depths. Miquella likely decided to create a statue of them together in order to honor him, but that's just my interpretation. With Miquella gone though, currently dealing with Mohg, Malenia is the only one who could be found here at the Erdtree. Her existence is tied up with an NPC Millicent, whose questline goes to great lengths to explain Malenia and her battle with Radahn. When Malenia unleashed the Scarlet Rot and Caelid, 5 sisters were born from the swamp. Gowry found and raised them as if they were his own, but only so that he could enact his plan. This plan has to do with Millicent and her sisters.
I am of Malenia's blood, but in what capacity I know not. I could be sister, daughter, or an offshoot. Whatever the case though, I am certain of a kinship between us. There is something I must return to Malenia, the will that was once her own, the dignity, the sense of self that allowed her to resist the call of the Scarlet Rot, the pride she abandoned, to meet Radahn's measure.
We've already mentioned how Malenia doesn't like Scarlet Rot. She refused to interact with the Kindred, and up until the fight with Radahn refused to use it in battle. She knew of the destructive power that was buried deep within her, and knew that it should never be unleashed. But Radahn forced her hand, as he was too powerful to be defeated by normal means. When the blossom occurred, she lost her sense of dignity, self, and resistance to the Scarlet Rot. The children of the swamp are manifestations of those feelings, and Millicent wants to return that back to her. Stopping us are her other sisters, as Gowry wants Millicent to blossom into her own flower and become a Scarlet Valkyrie, when Malenia becomes the Goddess of Rot. Gowry needs Millicent to suffer from a traumatic enough event so that this may happen, and her betrayal is the catalyst. Completing this quest the right way, helping Millicent fend off her sisters, sees her ripping out the needle we gave her and dying, claiming that she'd rather die than be a servant to the Rot. What's rather strange is that her questline ends here. It seems rather abrupt since we didn't really help her, but I think it has to do with the needle. Millicent's prosthesis, the item you get for betraying her, says that she will one day be reborn, and as we see, betraying her leaves behind a blossom flower. Malenia too leaves behind a flower when she dies, so is it too far-fetched to assume that Malenia too could be revived sometime later? I think this is ultimately why the quest still continues despite Millicent's death. The needle is found after defeating Commander O'Neill, who was near the swamp of Aeonia. This needle is passed around throughout the quest with its item description mentioning Millicent's goal of returning her duty and dignity. So assuming Malenia does revive sometime later, does that mean she would retain these emotions and feelings and go back to her old self? Possibly, but it's a stretch. Assuming this bizarre theory is true though, that would mean we not only helped Malenia but also stopped her from becoming the Goddess of Rot. A widely debated topic amongst the community is Malenia and her goddess status. The Scarlet Aeonia item says that Malenia has already bloomed twice, and that a third will turn her into the Goddess of Rot. Many believe that she's already bloomed 3 times, as her boss name in the second phase changes to Malenia, Goddess of Rot. with each bloom being Radahn's fight, this small blossom in a room before the boss room, and the one during the boss fight itself. The second blossom is the crux of the debate. Whose flower is this? Near the flower is a traveling maiden set, the same one used by Millicent and her sisters. And Millicent herself produces quite a large flower when she dies, which leads me to believe that this is her sister and Malenia only blossomed twice. Regardless of whether or not that's true, the questline reveals something I've always liked about Malenia. While she is seen as evil due to her actions in Caelid, it's important to note that prior to the event she fought tooth and nail with only her sword. As I said, she hated this power and knew that unleashing it was wrong. Like a lot of characters within this game, their actions make them neither good nor bad, more so complex. Malenia cared about her brother, the people of the Erdtree, and hates the rot, but needed to give into its power to save those same people, as her defeat could spell doom for the Erdtree. It's a classic example of better them than I. This could be expanded further beyond Malenia though, as every Shardbearer mentioned in this section has been dealt a unique hand and has handled these situations in different ways. Both Rykard and Godrick needed power as they were too weak on their own, so they decided to use some rather draconian methods in order to achieve this. Mohg took it one step further and wanted a demigod on his side, so he took a Miquella from the Erdtree and used the powers of the Formless Mother to achieve this. On the other hand, Radahn was infected with the Scarlet Rot, and yet still makes sure to stop the stars from falling and was such an inspiration to his men that they fight the rot in his honor. Rennala is a victim of circumstance and was dealt a few terrible hands in life, from the divorce of her husband to the clash between the moon and stars that she initially brought together. She's overwhelmed with grief and emotion, and to this day has no idea what to do. Morgott is one of the more complex characters around the same level as Malenia, as he is a victim of a system designed to make his life miserable, and yet somehow sees the light in its order, possibly out of ignorance or desperation. This is why I still find myself infatuated by this game's writing. Not only do we have an extremely detailed and complex cast of important characters, but each one has their own goals and ambitions. It's impossible to find a demigod who shares the same goals as another, and even those that have a broad connection to each other like Mohg and Rykard each pursue their similar goals in different ways. Elden Ring is like a massive choose-your-own-adventure book, where each location comes with its own problems, and each demigod has their own view of the world and reason for pursuing their goals. While most of these Shardbearers are optional, they are likely going to be some of your biggest targets on your way to your final goal of becoming Elden Lord. Thankfully, we don't have to do the fighting alone, as a few NPCs are willing to help us on our journey. The first of which ends up becoming one of the most important NPCs in the game, Malenia. She finds us just after dying to the grafted sign at the beginning of the game, only to turn up again when we rest at a site of grace. Malenia says that she offers us an accord. Seeing as there is no Honda around here, I assume she means a deal. She wants us to take her to the foot of the Erdtree, the place she was born, and in return she'll play the role of a finger maiden. As Vari will so helpfully put it prior, we are maidenless. We need a maiden, and Malenia, while not an official one, will play the role regardless, turning the runes we pick up into strength, allowing us to level up. She also grants us her steed Torrent, which will let us get around easier. The first thing she does is gain us access to the Roundtable hold. The Roundtable was created for like-minded Tarnished to scheme and plan so they can become the Elden Lord. Gideon is the one who welcomes us, and is the one we will communicate with for most of the game as we can trade knowledge on the demigods and their locations. The issue being that pretty much everyone but Gideon is focused on something else. Some don't want to be Elden Lord, and others are too scared to fight. This dampens the mood a little, as it feels like an uphill battle, that Elden Lord is some unattainable goal that no one seems interested in pursuing. It's made all the worse when you learn about the early days of the Roundtable. Other warriors existed back then, like Ulbrich, Vike, Vagrim, and more, who like us wanted to be Elden Lord, but neither of them have been successful. All for a variety of reasons, of course, but it makes you wonder, if no one's even come close, how the hell did we have any chance of making it? Thankfully, Malenia is here to assist us in this dire time, so at least we have someone in our corner. When conversing with her, she further iterates that we are Tarnished, people who lost the grace of the Erdtree, but now that the guidance of grace has returned back to us, we are able to return to the lands between, which is why we are here. These golden lines protruding out of the sites of grace are the guidance she speaks of, and following them will point you in the direction of the numerous Shardbearers we've discussed. Malenia will also talk about herself, saying that she's going to the Erdtree to learn about her purpose, something given to her by her mother a long time ago, and the reason why she is burned and bodiless. Malenia can only appear at certain points, so she doesn't seem to have a physical body, and her hands have burn marks on them, further showing that she was burned, likely the cause of why she is without a proper body. Along her journey to the Erdtree though, she will clue us in on a lot of details about the world. When you visit Churches of America, she offers to repeat the echoes that lay here, and they tell a rather interesting tale.
My lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring.
This implies that Marika knew what would happen with Godfrey and the Tarnished and seemingly planned on this happening so they could come back and become the Elden Lord. It's natural to assume then that Marika did this because she wants to betray the Golden Order in the Elden Ring. This is further reinforced by one of the members of the Roundtable hold, an old misbegotten named Hewig. He's a kind old chap, but it seems rather strange seeing someone tied to the Crucible here in the Sacred Roundtable. At one point you can come across Hewig praying to Marika, saying that making a weapon that slays a god is no easy feat. To spoil a bit of the ending, Marika is inside the Erdtree, but not only do we fight Radahn, but we also fight someone else after. Marika wants Hewig to make a weapon that slays a god, so that we kill her and the other beings involved with her. We need to get through her to get to them. The reasoning behind this is still unclear, but I do think that Marika wants their influence gone from the lands between. I also believe that Marika is guiding us throughout the game, especially once we hit the second half. Once we make it to the foot of the Erdtree, we find the door blocked by impenetrable thorns. Radahn has stopped us from entering the Erdtree. We know this because his rune, which is this cross-stitch pattern, is seen on the thorns, the same pattern seen on Radahnn's sword and scar seal. That's his rune, and he's barring us from entering. Radahn seems to oppose Marika's wishes and is actively working against her, so that is why he refuses us entry. From here on, I think that Marika is guiding our path as the Guidance of Grace still appears, and in fact takes us to the Giant's Kiln. As we discussed earlier, the only thing that could burn the Erdtree is the Giant's Flame, and the Guidance of Grace is leading us to that location. So I believe that Marika is helping us in this moment. The most important part of this section has to do more with Melina than it does Marika though, as to burn the thorns of the Erdtree, Melina must become the Kindling. To continue on, we must sacrifice Melina. But there is a second, more treacherous path we could follow too. Here at the mountaintops is a being called Shardbearer who is affiliated with the Frenzied Flame. The Frenzied Flame has its own ending, so I'll delve deeper into what this is when we get there, but he lets us know that we can become the Kindling instead, saving Melina in the process. The issue is that the Frenzied Flame is extremely destructive, and Shardbearer only seems to be playing into our desire to help Melina in order to further his own goals. Now this isn't the first time someone has had to deal with this predicament, nor the first person to be swooned by Shardbearer's convincing words. Bernal, one of the recusants of Rykard's manor, had plans to be Elden Lord, but he was hesitant to sacrifice his maiden, until she willingly did it herself. Not able to cope with what just occurred, he seemingly renounced his faith in the Golden Order and became a recusant instead. The other warrior was Vyke, the one from the Round Table. He is the guy on the front cover of the game, and for good reason. He was the closest Tarnished to ever become Elden Lord since the Shattering. Without warning though, Vyke would travel below Lindell and seek out the Frenzied Flame. This was supposed to result in him becoming the Lord of Frenzied Flame, but something failed. It's likely on account of him wearing armor, as we need to strip naked in order for it to work. But something else happened, as upon entering the Church of Inhibition, Vyke invades us. At the back of the church is a woman in a chair, dead. This is presumed to be his maiden, the one he desperately tried to save. But what happened? The ongoing theories I've heard throughout the years that either Shardbearer killed her to nudge Vyke into being the Lord of Frenzied Flame, or Vyke killed her when he was stricken with madness from the flames. Point being, Shardbearer has an agenda and is only trying to appeal to our desire to help Melina. Even if you do think this is a good idea, not even Melina, the one we are trying to save, is okay with this plan.
If you intend to claim the Frenzied Flame, I ask that you cease. It is not to be meddled with. It is chaos, devouring life and thought unending. However ruined this world has become, however mired in torment and despair, life endures. Births continue. There is beauty in that. Is there not?
For a long time, I was a staunch defender of this choice, because I always thought that taking the embrace of the Frenzied Flame was never to burn the world, but to save her from burning herself. Melina is this game's level-up lady, as I've often called them. Women who come to our aid, help us level up, and have an undying dedication to help us succeed in our path. None of them, from Demon Souls to Elden Ring, wrong us in any way, and some of them even help us achieve some less favorable endings. It's only fair that we would want to save them from dying, because their story doesn't deserve to end here. I've recently rejected this idea, however, and think Melina should burn despite my reservations. Malenia says herself that this is her purpose. Her purpose serves to aid in this very act of burning the thorns. But later she will clarify that while this purpose was given to her by her mother, she is doing this for herself. Not for her mother or anyone else. This was her decision. So who am I to disagree with that? The only reason we don't want Malenia to die is because she can continue on living, and that no one's purpose should be to be a sacrifice. But I find that selfish, as odd as it sounds. Because again, who are we to judge? Especially if this is a choice made by her and her alone. Malenia believes in our strength. It took a bit, admittedly, but it wasn't long into our journey when she realized that we will become the Elden Lord. This is her way of honoring our accord, her way of helping us achieve the goal we set out to complete. I don't like it either, but it would be selfish of me to take away Malenia's purpose right at the end just because I don't want her to die. If anything, this would help her in the long run, as she is without a body and can only travel to certain places. This would allow her soul and body to pass on, no longer being the wandering spirit that she is. So, we have to say goodbye to Malenia.
Thank you for guiding me here. The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death. Goodbye.
Now that we've committed the first cardinal sin, the burning of the sacred Erdtree, we have nowhere else to go but forward. No turning back now, especially now that she's sacrificed herself for us. Where Malenia took us was Majula. We talked about this at the beginning of the video, but Majula was a large memorial built during the time of the dragons, which housed the first Elden Lord, Dragonlord Blasigisax. At the end of this area, and our reason for being here, is the Beast Clergyman, who in the second phase will become Malekith, the Shadow of Queen Marika. His reasoning for being here is actually tied to his other counterpart. Within Caelid is a Beast Clergyman named Grank who wants us to feed him Deathroot. These two are the same being. This is further reinforced by Malekith calling us Tarnished when we first enter, which only occurs when you give Grank all 10 Deathroot before you arrive. This is because Majula exists outside of space and time. A common item here is the Ancient Dragon Smithing Stones, items which fully upgrade our weapons. Their description mentions that they are treasures of Majula, and are stones that lightly twist time, further confirming that Majula exists outside of space and time. God only knows how that's possible, but that's the long and short of it. The reason for his insatiable hunger for Deathroot ties back to his story. If you remember our earlier conversation about the Glowmite Queen, you'll recall that Malekith defeated her. Upon her defeat, Marika would seal the Rune of Death away, removing it from the Elden Ring. This rune was imbued into Malekith's blade, which explains why he cast its power during the second phase. But you'll also recall me saying that the Rune of Death's power was stolen, which is what gave rise to the Knight of the Black Knives. Well, when Godwin died, the power of the Rune of Death started to seep into the roots of the Erdtree, manifesting in the form of Deathroot. Since this power was taken from right under Malekith's nose, he feels partially responsible for the invasion of Deathroot, which is why he wants to consume it. Defeating him in the second phase has him releasing the Rune of Death, allowing us to use it, bringing death back to the world of Elden Ring. This further ignites the flames of the giants and burns the Erdtree proper, destroying the thorns and giving us a way inside. But because this game can't let us off the hook until we get to the credits, 2 more people stop us on the way. The first of which is Gideon, for the Roundtable. This was expected, of course, but not for the reasons you might think. Gideon and you have been working together to become Elden Lord, but only one of you is going to make it, so it makes sense why the 2 of you are duking it out. But his reason is actually the complete opposite, as he is instead here to uphold the will of Queen Marika. Gideon claims that Marika wants all Tarnished to fight endlessly for eternity, and so he's here to stop us from becoming Elden Lord. According to various items, Gideon was in communication with the 2 fingers. From their talk, he realized that both the 2 fingers and the Erdtree were broken. He even glimpsed into the will of Queen Marika and shuddered in fear at the end that should not be. This, of course, sounds like a completely different Marika than the one who was guiding us across the game. Which is what leads me to believe that Gideon is either terrified at the revelations he discovered and doesn't know what to do, or he simply has no idea what he's talking about. When Gideon dies, one of his lines is, "A man cannot kill a god." We already know this thanks to our discussion about Hewig, but at the time you'd be forgiven for thinking that killing a god was not on the table. I mean, Enya herself said that we'd be Marika's consort. She said nothing about slaying a god. This implies that Gideon has a lot of insider knowledge, things not known to most people in the lands between. But the secret of Radahn and Marika being the same being is also not common knowledge, and he might not be aware of it. Recall how Radahn barred us from entering. He doesn't want us to enter the Erdtree and be Elden Lord. In a way, struggling for eternity would be perfectly in line with his goals, so it's possible that this is the reason that Gideon fights us. But again, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. The final roadblock behind Gideon is, of all people, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord himself. His reasoning for being here is actually quite simple. Having been Elden Lord before, he's here to claim the title again. One of the coolest parts about the fight is the cutscene prior. We first see him mourning the loss of Morgott, showing that Godfrey cared for all his children, even those who were Omen. It's likely why there is a spirit of Godfrey that exists in Lindell that fights us before Morgott, as he likely conjured this. Not just as another line of defense, but as a way to remember the parent who actually cared about him. When Morgott's body officially withers away, however, his ashes are used as the guidance of grace, implying that Morgott may have been worthy of the Erdtree's embrace despite being Omen. This guidance of grace, however, is pointed right at us. Godfrey's task has been given, and so is ours, and we've officially hit a crossroads. This is why I love the framing of this battle. No ideals, beliefs, or values come into play here. It's a test of strength and a fight to the death. Only one will become Elden Lord, either the returning champ or the new challenger. If you manage to whittle his health down enough, Godfrey takes his beast Sirach and kills it, becoming Hoarah. Flashing back to our prior discussion on Godfrey, I mentioned how he was a brutish and bloodthirsty warrior. Not something that would exactly qualify him as a lord, so he had to become more dignified. He changed his name to Godfrey and had Sirach become a vessel for his bloodthirsty rage. With Sirach dead, all the rage has come back, Godfrey is gone, and Hoarah has returned once again. That does call into question the nature of Sirach though, as he's the only one of his kind and just kind of appears without much mention. While an item called the Beastclaw Great Hammer given to us by Garang talks about Sirach and how the fur and nails of the weapon are meant to represent him. Garang's bestial sanctum looks a lot like the halls of Far Majula, and we already know his real form Malekith is inside the floating memorial. This leads me to believe that Sirach, and possibly by extension the Shadows of the Empyreans, Malekith and Blythe, have come here from Far Majula. Shadows are selected by the Two Fingers to serve their Empyreans, but they need to come from somewhere, and this could have been the place, but that's just a theory of mine. What is clear though is that Sirach is more than just a JoJo stand for Godfrey, as he has his own autonomy. The Golden Beast's crest shield states that Sirach was a counselor who guided the Golden Lineage, the same line of Godfrey America that stretched all the way down to Godrick. So he's more than just a simple vessel, but again his birthplace as well as the birthplace of the Shadows is still unclear. With Godfrey dead though, nothing is stopping us from getting inside the Erdtree. Well, except me. Not to blue ball you right when things were just getting good, but there is still one demigod left unattended to. Miquella. While it may seem rather pointless to revisit the decaying body of a demigod stuck in an egg, as you'll eventually discover, some people have come to the lands between to heed the call of kindly Miquella. So it's best that we follow them and see where Miquella disappeared to. The DLC first starts in Mohg's boss arena. Touching Miquella's hand teleports us to the Shadowlands, a land shrouded in darkness tucked away from the eyes of the world. Despite feeling new and uncomfortable, there is a sense of familiarity within the Shadowlands. Content we've completed in the base game exists here too, but are slightly twisted around. Due to the DLC's shorter size, the game can't fit dozens of catacombs and ruins, so each dungeon type was lessened in number, with the upside that each carries with it a particular theme. Back in the lands between, the walking mausoleums were made to house long-forgotten demigods. It was a sign of royalty, status. Not everyone could have access to this. Now, while America cared very little for these children, they were clearly cared by others given the creation of these walking structures. In the Shadowlands, it's a bit different. The Helm of Solitude states that these mausoleums are for people who have lost their names or hearts. This turns out to be true as every boss in the mausoleum has no name, merely a title. Blackgel Knight, Dancer of Rennala, Red Bear, and even Rakshasa, which seems like a title according to his item description. So instead of demigods, we now have warriors. Similar buildings, different functions. Furthermore, take a look at the Everjails. Each one within the lands between held some kind of prisoner, each one being different from the next. There was no form to their placement, they were scattered around all over the place and always housed someone different. In the Shadowlands, Everjails no longer hold one being, but hundreds. These prisoners are also being fed and melted into jars. The specifics of why is something I'll get into shortly, but this is much different compared to the culture of the warrior jars than the lands between. The warrior jars back home are talking jars that take the bodies of dead warriors, stuff them inside the jars themselves, and use their essence to gain strength. It's a weird form of rebirth, but one that feels respectful, at least compared to what we see here in the Shadowlands. Instead of taking the deceased and giving them a chance to live on past their body's death by giving their strength to the jars, these people are tortured and stuffed into them in order to be reborn without their consent. Then there's the gravesites and catacombs. The lands between was a land of life. Those that died would return to the Erdtree via an Erdtree burial. The Shadowlands, conversely, is a land of death. Instead of designated structures, the entire land itself is one big graveyard. The suppressing pillar and a few other items point to this being a place where death seems to arrive. It's like a dumping ground of death. Cemetery shades, typically found in catacombs, are outstocked in the fields of the Cerulean coast. Spear graves and large coffins are found all over the Shadowlands, and the catacombs have been repurposed. Catacombs no longer have the roots of the Erdtree, but the roots of Godwyn. Just like Stormveil Castle in the Deep-Root Depths, Godwyn's face could be found in each catacomb, now guarded by his Death Knights. Knights who served him when he was Godwyn the Golden and will continue to serve him as he became the Prince of Death. Additionally, Deathbirds are now replaced with Gravebirds. Deathbirds were seen at gravesites in the lands between, as these birds in the days before the Erdtree would burn bodies in ghost flame, and they were the keepers of that sacred flame. But the practice still holds some significance here in the Shadowlands, as these stone gravebirds were seemingly created by someone or something, and were made to be related to the Deathbirds, but instead of real graves, they guard the spirit graves. Arguably the most important of these familiar locations comes in the form of the Dragon Communion sites, and the most insane NPC From Software has made to date.
My arms, my legs, each lies a bloody ruin.
Dragon Communion in the base game is only shown through altars that would allow you to take the hearts of dragons and consume them to gain new spells. The DLC elaborates on this detail by establishing that a rivalry took place between the dragons Bale and Placidusax, which gave rise to these altars. This explains a ton of details the base game refused to answer, like the wounds of Placidusax, a question that left a lot of people stumped for many years. Now we know the perpetrator, and we could even see those heads stuck to his body. It also explains the existence of the Dragon Communion sites. Each of the dragons in Elden Ring drop dragon hearts. The only two who aren't are Lanasax and Fortisax, the only two who just so happen to be ancient dragons. Placidusax seemingly wanted people other than the dragons to become hunters and kill Bale's kind. That's why this new dragon priestess Florisax is stationed here to guide us to Bale's location. It could even further explain the existence of the ancient dragon cult. As we talked about at the beginning of the video, after the war with the ancient dragons, Landsax assumed a human form, likely similar to the one Florisax has, and helped with the teachings of the ancient dragon cult. Which makes me wonder if this was another step in Placidusax's plan to destroy Bale. Regardless, the Old Lord would have his wish granted, as we could team up with Elden Ring's own Captain Ahab named Egon, who swears to end Bale's life. The story of Captain Ahab is an iconic one, where a captain of a ship named Pequod would spend the entire story fighting the giant whale known as Moby Dick as he bit his leg off during their first encounter. Within Elden Ring, Egon had a run-in with Bale some time ago and was utterly defeated. He lost his legs, his heart is filled with fear, but he is too angry to die. With our help, we can resume his fight and take down the beast together. Bale's boss fight is not only a beautiful spectacle from the climb up Jagged Peak to the boss fight itself, but it's one of those rare cases where not bringing Egon actually makes the fight worse in the end.
Bale the Dread, you shall haunt me no longer.
All these inclusions are meant to show us that a culture separate from the lands between exists within these lands. It's a place with its own values, beliefs, and structure, but where are these lands exactly? Well, according to that suppressing pillar, it's the center of the lands between. The reason for its absence on the map is due to the large veil placed overhead. Queen Marika has a similar veil placed over her bedchamber, but that's just one of the many items that all point to Queen Marika putting a veil over the Shadowlands in order to hide it from the world. The Lands of Shadow were once a part of the lands between, before they were hidden. This is further reinforced by the Shadow Tree looming over the land. Ruins of the region call it the Shadow of the Erdtree, and it's meant to be literal. Not literal in the sense that it's directly behind it, but literal in that it's a shadow. Light always produces a shadow, as it's the absence of light. Light and dark must coexist, that's just how the laws of the world work. And the same is true here. The Erdtree represents light, so there has to be something that represents darkness and shadow, which is the Shadow Tree. So instead of a place being blessed by the bright rays of the Erdtree, we now have a land blessed by the darkness of the Shadow Tree. Just like the Erdtree avatar, the Shadow Tree has its own avatar called the Shadow Tree Avatar. Its remembrance reads that it was born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bend its stock, rendering it brittle. Further reinforcing that this is a dark place with no sense of order, that is not impacted by the bright light of the Erdtree's order. That's why there is a lot of familiar elements like the mausoleums, warrior jars, and gravebirds. The Shadowlands was likely a part of the lands between at one point and shared the same customs. But now that it's separated, parts of the culture have been changed and altered, giving off that familiar yet unfamiliar vibe that persists throughout the land. But that leads us to the next question, which is, why Marika hid it in the first place? The Shadowlands has a gloomy atmosphere, opposite to the lands between, so we must ask how things came to be this way. Well, a lot of that has to do with Marika and her relationship to the Shadowlands. Behind the Shadow Keep is a place called the Shaman Village. It's one of the best locations in the DLC, possibly the whole game, due to the way it subverts expectations. As opposed to most of Elden Ring, where everywhere you go there are enemies waiting to kill you, and here, there is nothing. Just an abandoned village housing 2 items. It's a great example of less is more, as its lack of presence tells a story all on its own, especially when combined with the items we find here. The 2 items in question, minor Erdtree and Golden Braid, all tie back to Marika. This was her home. The reason for its abandonment is hinted at by the name Shaman. Shamans are mentioned in passing at Bonnie Village south of the main map. The ghost and item nearby talk about the shamans and how they were tortured with whips, further saying that their bodies meld harmoniously with others. This melding process is something we've already seen in the Everjails. These are Marika's people. With this in mind, it's interesting to think about why Marika would continue the culture of the warrior jars in the lands between, despite her horrific past. Which makes me think that either the culture was so embedded in the lands between that there was aught she could do to stop it, or she kept the ritual but made sure it was done with respect and grace, something her people were never given. While we may never know the answer, I see this as the game attempting to humanize Marika. The lands between paint her as evil and destructive, but the DLC is giving us another side of her, one filled with sadness and desperation. And the perpetrators of that sadness are the Hornsent. The Hornsent live in the Tower of Bellerot and have a striking amount of horns on them. Many item descriptions point to them worshipping the Crucible. It's a society of people that operates like the world did back in the days of the Crucible, where feathers, wings, and horns were seen as divine. The upper region of the tower in near Elim seems more like a closed-off religious section of the tower. This is further reinforced by the main warriors of Bellerot, the Horned Warriors. As within and near Elim are a few Divine Beast warriors, whose armor set says they are the chosen few of the Horned Warriors, further implying that in near Elim is a sacred holy place that those of the tower hope to join. The shape of the tower mimics their beliefs as they worship something called the Spiral. According to the Spira spell, it says that the Spiral is a normalized crucible current that will form a column that stretches to the gods. Their tower is meant to look like the Spiral, and at the very top is the Gate of Divinity, the place where Marika would become a god, connecting to that stretching to the gods part. But the item description says gods, so who are these gods? Well, I'm not sure, but if I had to guess, I wouldn't say it's necessarily an entity like Marika, but rather their gods are the Crucible. As seen earlier, the Crucible is intertwined with the Hornsent, so they worship Crucible ideas, like the Divine Beast. One of the bosses of the DLC is the Divine Lion, no doubt inspired by the lion dance from some Chinese cultures. According to one of its items, it says that Divine Beasts are messengers of the heavens. These Divine Lions then were made in honor of the Divine Beast that they worship. Some of their religious methods may have finally given us an answer to content left unresolved in the base game. Enir Ilim has a strange amount of bodies, some on the walls, on the floor, in the trees, and of course the gate itself is covered in them. The Gate of Divinity's current status could be attributed to Marika, but the rest seem to be intended parts of the tower. While I'm still not sure of their purpose and what they mean, they do look eerily similar to the corpses littered throughout the Eternal Cities. It's possible then, that before the Shadowlands was separated from the lands between, the Nox took some of the Hornsent's ideas and used them within their rituals. Given the Gate of Divinity is made to birth gods, and the Nox need their new Lord of Night, maybe they thought that replicating the Hornsent could produce their new lord. Similarly, there is a variety of talismans in the base game that contain horns. The base and +1 versions are connected to the ancestral followers, but the +2 versions are not only found near the Hornsent, but their item descriptions have been changed to reflect this. Like the Nox, I wonder if the ancestral followers discovered their culture and customs and wanted to continue practicing it within the lands between. This is just another example from the game to show just how deep the Hornsent's influence goes. Like the horns atop their head, the Hornsent are intertwined and entangled within lots of the game's history. This extends to one of the DLC's locations, the Abyssal Woods, as like the lands between, the Land of Shadow 2 was partially subjected to the Frenzied Flame. Blocking the entrance to the woods is Jory the Elder Inquisitor. Inquisitors were officials that were a part of a group or organization that would eliminate ideas deemed heretical, or would conflict with the current religious order. The Inquisitors of the Tower are here to remove the influence of the Frenzied Flame, with its owner being the leader of the manor named Midra. The forest is covered in the scars of the Frenzied Flame, with new enemies called Aging Untouchables stalking the paths of the Abyssal Woods and the surrounding wildlife being infected with madness. By any stretch of the imagination, this is extremely unholy and bordering on the line of pure evil. Once the Hornsent got word of what was going on, they dispatched the Inquisitors right away. Some guard the entrance to the woods, preventing things from getting in or out, while others look through the manor itself for clues, information, or anything that's worth salvaging. Midra himself seems to be alive when we arrive, but they manage to subdue him by implanting a sword in the shape of a ribcage through his head, likely to prevent the spread of the Frenzied Flame's influence, as he rips out the blade when we arrive and gives into the power of the flame, becoming the Lord of Frenzied Flame. So it's clear that the Hornsent had a very ritualistic and religious culture, but their rituals went too far when they started kidnapping people and putting them in jars. Their reasoning seems to be regarding the Gate of Divinity at the top of the tower. This is the same tower seen in the story trailer for the DLC, which talks about Marika ascending to godhood. But how did that happen? Well, the jails and shamans point to the Hornsent trying to create a god of some kind using this ritual in the Gate of Divinity. That same trailer talks about a great betrayal and seduction. Betrayal implies that Marika was allies with someone, likely the Hornsent, only to betray them at some point. But if they subjugated her people and stuffed them in jars, then when did she ally herself with them? Well, I sort of have an idea. Near the Shaman village are a set of finger ruins. We'll talk about the lore complications of this in just a moment, but we know that Marika was an Empyrean, so she had her own two fingers who could have come from this ruin. These two fingers could have instructed Marika on how to avenge her people, which led to the massacre we see in the story trailer, where the Gate of Divinity is seen covered in hundreds of bodies all belonging to the Hornsent. Regardless, the end result is clear. Marika became a god using the Gate of Divinity at the top of Bellerat. This would eventually lead to the creation of the Golden Order, with the Erdtree being its main symbol of worship. And thanks to the minor Erdtree spell, we know that the Erdtree isn't just a tree to Marika. Unlike most spells which have its origins tied to groups, this comes directly from Marika herself. The Erdtree is not just a tree, it represents her people, village, culture, and their eventual demise. It's likely this that caused the pain she suffered to never subside, as when the Golden Order was established, she would announce a crusade against the Hornsent, leading to what we see in-game. The head of this crusade was her son Messmer the Impaler. According to Commander Geist's remembrance, he and Messmer were considered the elder brothers to Radahn, so Messmer was likely the first child of Marika. Messmer's kindling also mentions a younger sister who bore a vision of flame, someone I've continually claimed is Melina, especially given our discussion about her earlier, which would mean that Melina is also one of Marika's firstborn. Along with Messmer were his loyal soldiers and his Black and Fire Knights. His Fire Knights were the ones who knew him personally, which is notable given what he is. Or, I guess it's better to say what he will become. Messmer is accompanied by a couple winged serpents, but in his second phase he transforms and reveals his true form. Messmer has an entity known as the Abyssal Serpent writhing around in his eye, which Marika has sealed using a seal of grace. His personal Fire Knights may have known about his condition, but it seems as though others may not have, as a few Black Knights, specifically Captain Hu and Commander Andreas, left his command shortly after learning of this. That wouldn't be that much of a major hit to morale though, as Messmer was joined by many others, like Omen Killers, Academy Scholars, and Carrion Knights. The most remarkable of them was a Carrion princess known as Rennala, younger sister to Rennala. Despite her birthright status, which would have led her to becoming a Carrion queen like her older sister, Rennala left the manor to join Messmer. Her current weapons is the Twin Blades, which give off a real Pontiff Sullivan vibe. But her first weapon was the Carrion Thrusting Shield. She seems to have stopped using it as her twin blades are now imbued with the flames of Messmer. I don't know what's going on with these two, but it's gonna make some waves on AO3. The inclusion of these soldiers actually does give us a good timeline as to when this crusade occurred. Since there are Carrion and Academy members, it must have been after the Liurnian War between Radahn and Rennala. Messmer also calls us Tarnished, so he's familiar with the term, so this also occurred after Godfrey and many others lost the grace of the Erdtree. While the timeline isn't perfectly clear, what is Marika's hatred for this place. So like those that came before, such as the Nox, Gloam-Eyed Queen, and Fire Giants, the Hornsent were dealt with swiftly and efficiently. Messmer became the vessel for the Hornsent's anger, as said by his armor set, "Direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief towards me alone." Messmer made himself a symbol of fear to the Hornsent that it would draw attention away from Marika. The Hornsent wouldn't take this punishment lying down and fought back, only to be completely defeated. The story trailer shows just how easy it was for Messmer and co to wipe them out. They spared no expense. The Land of Shadow has been burned and inflamed, and any and all buildings belonging to the Hornsent were destroyed. Polluting them now are furnace golems. These are based on the ancient design of the Wicker Man, which is used to sacrifice people. The furnace golem has a visage that supposedly resembles the fell god that haunts the sagas of the Hornsent. So it seems like the Hornsent were scared of the Fire Giants and their god, likely because of their destructive flames. So the Crusaders implanted these visages on the Furnace Golem to terrify them the same way the Omen Killers are just to terrify Omen. Bellerot, like the buildings on the outskirts, was put to the flame. The divine beasts the Hornsent worshipped were almost all killed, and they also seem to have covered in near limb and impenetrable thorns, similar to what Radahn did to the Erdtree. That said, not everyone was keen on wiping out an entire culture. Fire Knight Salza refused to burn down an old ruin at the risk of their own life, like the ruin of Ra that they're seen protecting. Ra is quite fascinating, as its origins seem to date back to the Crucible. The Antiquity Scholar Cookbook is said to have been left behind by Hornsent academics who were learning about the ancient ruins. I can imagine academics of the Hornsent would want to learn about their ancient history and thus would want to know about the Crucible. Additionally, the Talisman of all Crucibles is found here, which states that this was rumored to have sprouted upon a giant and is known as the Mother of all Crucibles in ancient tower lore. A Crucible Knight named Devonia is here too, who according to their armor set departed the lands between to find the origin of the Crucible. So not just the Land of Shadow, but these very ruins could have been the origin of the Crucible, which would explain why the Hornsent would want to study its history. Another Fire Knight named Hild also urged that their specimens be preserved in the storehouse. The storehouse is a massive 7-floor tall building that houses all kinds of tablets and scrolls. There are also a few bodies hanging on the rafters. One is a massive Hornsent that looks like a giant, and the other looks eerily similar to Torrent, which could explain why one of the promotion images for the DLC showed Miquella riding Torrent. The text within the storehouse can't be read, but I imagine this is a combined selection of notes. Those of the Crusade were likely studying the area to become more acclimated with it, and these specimens could be the Crusaders also dissecting and studying the nature of the Hornsent. But outside of that, like I said, quickly and efficiently. So efficient, in fact, that Messmer would have accidentally spawned in 2 Outer Gods within the Lands of Shadow. Both the Blood Fiends and Romina were contacted by the Outer Gods during the Crusade. An item called the Outer God Heirloom is found near one of their settlements, which says that the clan lost everything in the Great Fires. They are also seen in a nearby cave surrounded in blood, invoking the will of the Formless Mother, just like Mohg, by stabbing a spear into the air. As for Romina, she's actually seen in the story trailer, as her spear is similar in shape to the one the woman has in the trailer. During Messmer's conquest, the church was burned down, and when she arrived, she found a twisted divine element that she turned into the baleful Scarlet Rot. These Scarlet Buds say that there was a time when they weren't touched by the Scarlet Rot's blight and were a symbol of the church, confirming that the buds of the church existed prior to the cleansing, but then were combined with the Scarlet Rot when its elements were found post-burning. Like I said in my previous video, I still don't believe that this means that the Outer Gods were born because of Messmer. More so, they decided to make themselves known because of the Crusade. Each of these Outer Gods seems to prey on some kind of suffering. The Formless Mother specifically allies herself with those of accursed blood, which is why she contacted Mohg. So that's not to say that Messmer created the Formless Mother, more so created a situation that would allow her to commune with those affected by the Crusade. From our talk about the destruction, it's clear that Messmer and all those who rallied by his side found victory quick and without effort, and yet the reward for all this cruel and inhumane war was abandonment. For Messmer and company, this was a one-way trip. Messmer in many ways is like the Nameless King from Dark Souls 3. For those unaware, in Dark Souls 1 there was an item description that talked about Gwyn's firstborn who was removed from the annals of history. This was due to him siding with the dragons at one point during his life, but it wasn't until Dark Souls 3 that we learned of his identity. Similarly, Messmer 2 was removed from the annals of history. FromSoft is usually pretty good at putting descriptions into items that don't have ties to the base game, only to have them become relevant once the DLC drops. But in this case, there is no item, as far as I'm aware, that even suggests Messmer's existence. Marika did not want any of this coming back to her, so she sealed the place up, locked her people there with no way out, and continued to reign as if nothing happened. A large reason why could be tied to his remembrance, which talks about his serpents and how Marika feared them. Serpents and flames are two well-defined things that are prohibited in the Golden Order, and Messmer wields them both. I initially thought that Messmer donned these attributes on purpose to fuel his crusade, using all kinds of blasphemous tools against those that wronged the Golden Order, as this battle was far from the lands between and thus no one would know of the hypocrisy, but it seems like Messmer was instead born with these abilities. The aforementioned serpents were there since his younger years, and Messmer's orb says that his fire is his own but that he too despised it. This betrayal by his mother made Messmer bitter, especially after everything he did for her. He harbors a deep hatred for Marika, and this is made all the worse when the Tarnished arrives on his doorstep. As Messmer says himself,
"Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?"
How could Marika allow a Tarnished to become a lord when they were never gifted the guidance of grace? It's the final nail in the coffin, the final insult. And yet, for all this hatred, he seems to love and respect her all the same. Behind his boss room is a statue of Marika holding a baby Messmer. He built the Shadow Keep purposely ahead of the Shaman village so that it was left untouched by the ravages of the Crusade. And he has a couple of tree sentinels guarding the region in case someone slipped by. He even seems to be helping reverse, or at the very least study, the effects of the jars. In the western region of Shadow Keep is a makeshift clinic of sorts with hundreds of jars, all with their innards spread atop the floors and beds. It's a peculiar thing to have here, inside the Shadow Keep no less, so Messmer might be attempting to help Marika's people in hopes of finding a cure. Or if all else fails, at least give them a chance to pass on. Despite all this effort though, none of it was seen. Marika has no idea that her child is still alive and continues to act on her behalf, and Messmer is unaware of his mother's current predicament. It's quite sad because they clearly had a love for each other. The statue is the biggest sign here, it's the only one of its kind. Most statues either have Marika's standard pose or ones that are similar to it but with her head cut off, likely caused by Messmer's men when they realize that they won't be coming home. His statue of Marika has him portrayed as a child. I imagine it's a reminder of better days, back when life was simpler, and Marika was nothing more than a loving and caring mother, not the warmongering god that she became. There was love there, for a time, but now it seems as though this flame has burned out. It speaks to a larger discussion about Marika herself. Something I've always wondered is why she shattered the Elden Ring in the first place. Was it because one of her children died? Was it because of Godwyn? Or was it something else? I'm still not sure, but the DLC provides a bit more background on that night thanks to it shining a light on Marika's past. Marika saw death, gruesome, unholy stuff that should have never seen the light of day. She continued to adopt the culture regardless, likely because she saw the good they could provide but vowed to do better. And yet death continued to linger no matter how much she tried to escape it. The horn scent continued to reappear, not directly but are seen in her children. Morgott and Mohg were born with the Omen curse. They were given horns, similar horns to those that killed her people. No wonder she locked the Omen away when establishing her order. She probably had a form of PTSD from these events and didn't want to be reminded of those days. Messmer and Malenia, the first of her children, were inflicted with visions of flame, with Messmer being embedded with a serpent. Malenia is inflicted with scarlet rot, and Miquella with the curse of eternal youth. It's almost like some divine curse was put on Marika due to her actions here in the Shadowlands. She saw countless people die in her village, so she created a world where her offspring would never fear death, as she plucked the rune of death from the Elden Ring. But yet, even then, someone found a way to siphon its power and kill her child. After trying everything, even removing death itself in an effort to stop the pain of seeing the ones she loved fall in front of her, she gave up. She shattered the Elden Ring and plunged the world into chaos. Marika's mind is as shattered and fragmented as her body. I can't imagine the pain she must have been in to do such a thing. To think that this act that was brought upon your people would refuse to leave your side even today, infecting your children, polluting your land, and even when you try to stop the death of your people, death itself still finds a way. Returning to our conversation about the complexity of the game's characters, Marika is the textbook example of this. Someone who did inexcusable things, but also suffered greatly in their life. Marika didn't deserve the fate that was bestowed upon her, but she didn't need to take the action she did. And it's this gray area that I love about her. Did Marika need to start a deadly crusade, which included killing and torturing those of Bellerot? No. But can you see the breadcrumb trail that led us to this outcome? Absolutely. Elden Ring is a story of cycles, and how violence begets violence regardless of where it starts. And yet, this was all supposed to be worth it. This, the Golden Order. Under the guidance of the Greater Will, this was meant to usher in a new era of life. An age of plenty, an age of prosperity and perfection under the Erdtree. But even that was a lie. Ymir, head of the Cathedral of Manus Metyr, will tell us that the world of the Erdtree is built on hypocrisy, claiming that both Marika and the Fingers were broken from the start. What he's referring to is what is located underneath his cathedral. After going through 2 ruins, an underground lair will be opened, revealing a boss called Metyr, Mother of Fingers. Its remembrance states that it's not only a daughter of the Greater Will, the creator of the 2 Fingers and Finger Creepers, but also the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between. Its weapon, the Staff of the Great Beyond, also says that it receives signs from the Greater Will from beyond the microcosm, but that there hasn't been a message for quite some time. So not only did she create the 2 Fingers, but Metyr has been stepping in for the Greater Will the whole time. One of his other conversations is about the world beginning from stardust that exploded from the cosmos, which sounds a lot like what happened when the Greater Will broke off from the One Great. As I said at the beginning, that act was considered Elden Ring's Big Bang, and so the Greater Will would be considered the creator. It should be noted though that the Greater Will still does not have a form as far as we know. In our language, saying the word God usually implies that there's a being behind it, like Marika. But the Greater Will could be formless and have no form like the Outer Gods, or it could be a concept like a representation of the stars or a universe. Nevertheless, it would be an understatement to say that the knowledge we've known up until now has been turned on its head. The Golden Order was founded on the advice of the Greater Will through the Two Fingers, but that was a lie. The Greater Will was never around. So how can we truly trust the words of an order whose origins were lies? The Two Fingers are communicating with a false god, who created a false order that governs the land with false words. The blame does not fall on Marika though. As Ymir puts it, the blame is solely on the mother. Elden Ring is a story of violence, yes, but it's equally about motherhood and how the corruption of the mother leads to corruption in the offspring. Mitir yearned for its mother and never received word from it. This neglection led to further neglect of its offspring. The Two Fingers and Finger Creepers looked towards Mitir for guidance only to be met with similar static. Marika came into her role as mother when the Golden Order was established, but considered many of her children to be weak and forgettable. She had her firstborn cleanse a whole land only to force him into exile, and locked up 2 of her sons from being born with horns. This caused a similar amount of hatred to spread to her children, who all warred with each other after the Shattering. But out of all of them, one was affected by Marika's tyranny so much that he decided that it was his destiny to right those wrongs and do what his mother could not. Miquella is the main star of the DLC, whose goal is to ascend to godhood and bring with it an age of compassion. Joining us is an entourage of like-minded warriors, all of whom came to the Land of Shadow to find Miquella. One of my favorite parts about the DLC is this band of warriors we travel with. I mentioned during our conversation with Gideon that it felt odd how all of these people were a part of the Roundtable and yet did absolutely nothing to work toward the goal that the Roundtable was built on. That's changed with Shadow of the Erdtree. There is a much larger focus on NPCs here than arguably any other Souls game to date, and that's all due to how they tie into the narrative. Since we are no longer in the enemy and my enemy is my friend stage and are now proper allies, each one pulls their weight and offers guidance when needed. Most of the major bosses can be fought with an NPC at your side. Frey can be summoned for the Divine Lion, Leda for Rennala, Hornsent for Mesmer, Teolia for Putrescent Knight, Dryleaf Dane for Romina, and Ansbach and Teolia can be summoned for the group fight later and the final boss. Them being at the front of the plot like this makes them feel like an actual team as opposed to us, once again, being the only one pulling our weight. The team itself is comprised of some very diverse individuals. Leda is a Needle Knight who serves under Miquella along with Dryleaf Dane. Freya is a Redmane who fought alongside General Radahn. Ansbach is a former Pureblood Knight who served under Lord Mohg. Hornsent is obviously Hornsent of the Tower, and Mor and Teolia, while not having a specific affiliation like everyone else, is here to see Miquella. In order to find Miquella, we are to follow the direction of his crosses. Miquella left behind a fair amount of crosses on the way to his destination, but the description of them is quite concerning. The first cross says that he left his flesh behind. A little odd, but not wholly worrying. That is until he starts removing things that are more than physical parts. Things like doubts and vacillations. The placement of this cross is significant though, as beneath that is a cross where he abandoned his love. If you follow the path all the way down, you will find his love in the form of the sleepy purple girl, known as Saint Trina. Saint Trina was a character mentioned in the base game, usually in items dealing with sleep and dreams. It was a theory for a while that Miquella and Saint Trina were one and the same due to the Sword of Saint Trina item, that says that some people saw Saint Trina as a girl and others a boy, and Miquella notably has some feminine features. The DLC finally confirms this theory, showing that the two were once the same. Saint Trina and Miquella are the same being. Trina is a part of Miquella that he ripped out himself. Now she lays down here in eternal slumber. One of the members of our team, Teolia, has been meaning to find her, and through his questline you can talk to Saint Trina, who revealed that she wants us to stop Miquella. Living up to her description, Trina loves Miquella and wants to save him from himself. She believes that godhood will be a curse and that we must stop him from becoming a god. Which of course is his ultimate goal. Follow in the footsteps of his mother, and become a god to right her wrongs. This conversation about the nature of Saint Trina could also be the answer to what's been going on with Marika and Radahn. Miquella and Saint Trina are able to coexist without one needing to take control, so the same should be possible for Marika and Radahn. Leading me to believe that Radahn was a part of Marika that she too discarded herself of at some point in her life. Now, humor me for a moment. Assuming this is true, then what does Radahn represent to Marika? If Saint Trina is the love of Miquella, what is Radahn to Marika? Well, I think it's loyalty. Radagon's full boss name is Radahn of the Golden Order. Ever since his inception, at least as far back as the history books tell it, he has done nothing but fight for the Erdtree and the Golden Order, both back during the war with Rennala and right here during the events of the game. He even considers himself to be one with the Golden Order, both in name and in action, as he's the one who stops us from entering the Erdtree. To spoil a bit of the final fight, the beginning cutscene is a lot like the intro. Marika and Radahn are both present, but Radahn is the one who fights us. Marika never appears until after it's over. Radahn to me represents Marika's unwavering loyalty to the Golden Order, and her divesting herself of that was her attempt to sabotage the Order. So assuming any of this is true, this could explain what we discussed during Melena's section. Radahn is Marika's loyalty, a being who is unquestionably devoted to the Order they serve. A part of her that Marika removed in order to go against the Golden Order and what it represents. And it's what the Golden Order represents that brought Miquella to the Land of Shadow in the first place. The crosses show us that Miquella is removing parts of himself as he continues his journey. Saint Trina represented Miquella's love, but it's clear he was having trouble removing this part of him because he removed his doubts and vacillations prior. Vacillation or vacillating is defined as to waver in mind, will, or feeling, or hesitation in choice of options. Miquella was hesitant to remove this part of him, so he removed his inability to question his decisions in order to do so. This should be an immediate red flag, as Miquella is abandoning everything in the pursuit of his goal, but he's becoming someone he no longer is in the process. But that's not all he removed. He even shattered his Great Rune. We can find the broken shards of it after the Shadow Tree avatar at the base of the Shadow Tree. Its description repeats much of what we've already said. That Miquella is abandoning everything in an effort to bury the original sin, embrace the whole of it, and be reborn as a god. The original sin is likely referring to the act that took place that resulted in Marika becoming a god. But the breaking of his Great Rune didn't just affect him. Upon approaching the Shadowkeep castle, a sound will play and a message will show, saying that a Great Rune was broken and a spell has been lifted. This spell the game refers to is the one that was put on all the NPCs we meet, which is what compelled them to come here and band together. Given how Elden Ring and all the other Souls games operate, it's really odd to see an actual functioning group for once, so clearly something was up. Miquella's ability to charm is nothing new to Elden Ring. The Bewitching Branch item has the power to charm a nearby foe to fight for you. The item description mentions Miquella by name, and the sigil that's cast around it is the symbol of the Haylig tree. The DLC shows us though just how powerful these charms can be. His charms seem to be able to alter people's personalities. People like Freya, the Hornsend, and Letta are fine and are only minorly shaken up, but Ansbach starts to panic as memories of his past with Miquella start to flood in. Back when he was a pure-blood knight, he challenged Miquella to combat only to have his heart stolen. I assume this means charmed, as we'll also be able to have our hearts stolen too during the final boss fight, and the attack itself implies that we forfeit everything in service of Miquella. While an argument could be made that he initially came here to kill Miquella only to be charmed when he arrived, Ansbach certainly did not want to be allies, so his sudden tone shift conveys how much power Miquella has over the people he commands. He seems to be able to remove past emotions from people, forcing them to suppress things they don't know they are. Something that is a large part of Letta's development, as now that she is free from the spell, she has concerns that there are those within the group who wish to do Miquella harm. She will then request our aid in assassinating the Hornsend and Ansbach at different points. This seems to be a running theme with her, as her sword says that the blade still reeks with the stench of crusted blood that lingers from the cull of her knightly comrades. The lacerating cross-tree talisman will further add that the Needle Knights were in service of Miquella, but now they are no more, save for one. So Letta killed all her comrades, likely because she didn't trust them, just as she doesn't trust us now.
I've come to a realization. There's ample evidence. Without kindly Miquella's influence, I'm quite mistrustful of others.
Well, at least she's honest, I guess. Naturally, this is only going to get worse, and when it does, it results in the entire group picking sides and fighting each other in a large-scale battle. Letta stops us right before we meet with Miquella and says that she figured out why we came. We came not because of Miquella, but because of the Erdtree. Further saying we weren't affected by the breaking of the Great Rune because we were never charmed to begin with. And she is completely correct. While every individual player may have different tastes and endings and differ in opinion when it comes to the Golden Order and its policies, we are fighting for the Erdtree. Even if that means burning it to the ground, we are doing it in service of the goal we were given in the beginning. Cross the fog to the lands between and become Elden Lord, and there is no way in hell we're giving that up now. The guidance of grace led us to the demigods, and here it is again in the DLC, leading us to Miquella. Letta realizes this and forbids us from continuing, forcing us to take down her and her allies. However, this fight is highly customizable, as certain decisions can not only add or subtract to Letta's forces, but the same can be done to yours. Letta's team consists of herself, Dryleaf Dane, Freya, Morn, and the Hornsend, while yours consists of Tiolier and Ansbach. Not exactly a fair fight, but again you can tip the odds in your favor. Letta will ask you to assassinate the Hornsend when you reach Shadowkeep. If you accept, he won't appear for the fight. Mor will take his own life if you tell him to remain sad forever after the Great Rune has broken, taking him out as well, and I believe Freya won't join if her quest wasn't completed, leaving you with just Letta and Dane. But what are their reasons for being here? Everyone was here because of Miquella, but now we've been splintered off and become broken, fractured even. So what are we all fighting for? Leda and Dane have and will continue to be dedicated to Miquella, so that won't change. The Hornsent wants you to summon him for the fight with Mesmer, claiming that it will quench his vengeance. Regardless of if you do or do not, his vengeance won't be quenched, leading him to either attack you later at the ancient ruins or leave broken and defeated only to return with a new goal. Now that her son is dead, the Hornsent vows to take down Marika and her allies, which naturally includes us. Mor always liked Miquella, so there's no reason for Mor to betray him now, and obviously Teolie fights for Saint Trina as her sleepiest warrior. Freya and Ansbach, however, join opposing sides during the same quest, but their reasoning is wrapped up in the reveal right after this. With that settled though, all the fighters have made their way to the arena, the stars have aligned, and the future of Miquella hangs in the balance. Round 1. Fight. I'm being honest when I say that this is not only my favorite fight in the DLC, it's my favorite in the entire game. This is mostly on account of me feeling nostalgic for the good old Fight Club days of Dark Souls 3, but I do find the narrative that's present here to be what sells the fight the most. I've always loved the NPCs of the Souls games. It's honestly the thing I look forward to the most. Grandiose, tough boss fights? That's a given, but the stories of the NPCs are always unique and diverse. I want to know the who, what, where, when, hows of these characters. What are they doing here? Do they have a similar goal to us? Why do they act the way they do? I love these parts of the Souls game, so it's no secret I came to like this fight. A DLC with a major importance on NPCs was an immediate hook for me, and given it's a Souls game, I knew this was coming, but I wasn't sure how, and I couldn't be more happy with its inclusion. We have to fight the same comrades that had our back. Seeing the team deteriorate like this was, again, expected, but it still hurts all the same. It's less a clashing of swords and more so a clash of ideals. Everyone is here for different reasons, but the goals are just broad enough that two distinct teams can be formed, and only one is going to come out on top. Once the battle is over and the last member of the team has been slain, we get to say our goodbyes and confront Miquella, only to be stopped by a familiar entity. Radahn is the final boss of the DLC, who is joined by Miquella during the second phase, with a nice little homage thrown in during that initial cutscene. Despite the clothesline that is this twist, the game does a wonderful job explaining it to you beforehand. Since the DLC has such a major focus on the party, interacting with them will provide you with this info prior to the fight. Both Ansbach and Freya are at the storehouse looking for information that explains what Miquella plans to do.
Yes, I should have known. Even the truth was itself mere folly. As if using Lord Mohg to gain entrance to the Land of Shadow were not enough, he plans to use his corpse as the vessel of his king consort.
Yes, of course. I see. As the Festival of War concluded, General Radahn's soul met an honorable end, but kindly Miquella wishes to revive it, which is fine by me.
So Miquella planned to invoke the secret rite as said in the secret rite scroll. A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. So this explains why Mohg and Radahn needed to be killed before the DLC began. Miquella is going to transport the soul of Radahn into Mohg to create his promised consort, and he needed to come to the Land of Shadow to do this since all manner of death washes up from the shore. Radahn's appearance will then usher in Miquella, which is what happens in the second phase. Miquella comes back from the Gate of Divinity now as a fully complete god. This also explains why Freya and Ansbach were on opposing sides during the fight. Freya wanted Radahn to be revived, and Ansbach didn't want his lord's body to be desecrated. Something I did not expect was for the DLC to do its damnedest to frame the Mohgwyn dynasty in such a positive light. Our first taste of Mohg comes on learning that he took a demigod that the player knows to look like a small child, and the very first NPC we ever meet insults us. Contrast this to this very moment, where not only was it revealed that Mohg's actions were not of his own, but Ansbach is quite possibly the most level-headed NPC in this game. Right before the fight you could confess to killing Mohg, but not only does he not care because there are more important things that we have to deal with, but also understands that as a lord, Mohg will have to win his own battles and he lost in an honorable duel. Not to let Mohg off the hook just yet though, we have to consider how charmed Mohg was. For characters like the Hornsent and Leda who were already comfortable with Miquella, convincing them was unnecessary. Miquella needed Mohg to get to the Land of Shadow, so was it pure coincidence that Mohg also wanted Miquella for his dynasty, or was that a part of the plan? It's not something explained by the game. I do think that the dynasty was established prior to meeting Miquella. Ansbach is a pure blood knight, and his dialogue implies that he served Mohg and then fought Miquella at some point only to be defeated. I also think that Miquella being the god of the dynasty was a part of the plan as well, which would mean that Mohg overstepped and got charmed by Miquella when he went to grab him. That's just my thoughts on the matter, but I'd love to hear what you think. But this desecration and manipulation of his half-brother shows the lengths that Miquella was willing to go to achieve his goal. But a god needs a lord, and a lord needs a god, so Radahn and Miquella had to work together. Their plan involved a vow that was made early on in their life. This has been the most debated topic that's come from the DLC, as no one seems to know what the vow is and whether or not Radahn agreed to it. The vow, at least from Miquella's side, seems to be that Radahn was to become his consort. The way the text is read, it seems like this wasn't Radahn's plan. His armor set clarifies what Malenia whispered to him during their fight before she bloomed, which was, quote, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." It's only natural to think that this fight was a result of Radahn's disagreement with the vow. This also reveals that Malenia was in on the plan. Regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree that Radahn agreed to the vow, Malenia was certainly aware of it and even took great strides to make sure it was upheld. Irregardless of the conditions, I still find Miquella's goals and attempts to be flawed. He wants to embrace the sins of his mother, he feels like he needs to, and I feel like this has corrupted him since. He believes himself to be the one responsible, the one that will undo the unjust, and I think this pressure is weighing him down. Miquella felt that these sins were his own, but that's not true. The blame lies solely on the mother. Marika is the one who's at fault here, and it should be her that is to blame and not Miquella. Even then, the validity of his new age is questionable. Miquella wants an age of compassion, but has no compassion for his other half nor his half-brother. The ghost in your Saint Trina puts it perfectly. Kindly Miquella, I've seen you thrown away something you should not have under any circumstances. How will you offer salvation to those who cannot be saved when you cannot even save your other self? In an attempt to be better than his mother, he has become just like her. Both would rule the lands between as gods with their bloodthirsty warriors as consorts. Godfrey waged war with countless groups like the Fire Giants. He was so brutish that he needed a beast to quell his rage. He fought for the love of the game. And Radahn looked up to Godfrey, so I have no doubt in my mind that nothing would change. As the quote often goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I do believe that Miquella initially had good intentions. I think wanting a safe and compassionate world is a completely normal thing to want. A world like the Erdtree is a world without issue. It's a melting pot where people can live together in spite of their differences. But along the way he lost himself. In removing parts of himself, I think he quite literally lost the part of him that should have remained. He is no longer the Miquella he once was. He is a god without love, doubt, or vacillation, claiming to usher in an age of compassion. But what is compassion without love? But now we've come to the end. With everything finished, all bosses defeated, and all content discussed, we have just one boss left. Walking inside the Erdtree, we are greeted by Marika, crucified on a rune arc. She manages to break free, only for Radahn to appear before us. There are some pretty obvious parallels to Jesus and Christianity here. Marika even has a spear going through her side, similar to the holy spear that pierced Jesus on the cross. That spear, as far as I'm aware, was meant to make sure Jesus was dead after he had been hanging on the cross. In the context of Elden Ring, the spear is once again used as confirmation, not of death, but of confinement. Like we talked about before during the Malenia section, I believe that Marika had plans to rebel against the Golden Order. This spear in her side is meant to keep her locked up in the Erdtree so that she can't escape. But the question is, who put it here? Well, the obvious answer would be Radahn, since he attempts to stop us, still playing his role as the loyal soldier of the Golden Order. But I don't think it was him, as Radahn isn't the only being locked in this room. This is the Elden Beast, another being sent by the Greater Will along with Mitir, and is the physical manifestation of the Elden Ring. We are fighting the Elden Ring itself. This is the beast Marika wanted us to defeat. This is why she employed Hewig to craft a weapon capable of killing a god. And the Elden Beast is the most likely candidate for trapping Marika in here, as he has a similar grab attack. It's kind of fitting that the design of the final boss is this alien-like being. Space and the cosmos are equally confusing and mysterious. The Elden Beast came from the outer reaches of space, so there should be a lack of uniformity in its design. It's meant to be alien, something we've never seen before. The body of the Elden Beast is also covered in stars and clusters, reflecting the design of its home in the cosmos. When you attack it though, you'll notice that it feels like hitting glass. There's even a noticeable fracture on its stomach, just like the fracture on the Elden Ring, further showing the connection. If you manage to fell this large beast, congratulations, you've not only killed a god, but now you can finally choose your ending. Most of the endings are connected to Marika's body. She and Radahn were vessels for the Elden Ring. We saw the runes peeking out of Radagon's body. There was a bit of a tragic quality to it, in that Marika, even in her shattered, petrified state, is still going to be the vessel for the Elden Ring. We get to become Elden Lord and now arguably de facto leader as the god of the land is unresponsive, whose body is only being used to continue to power the Elden Ring. As Marika's seals say, solemn duty weighs upon the one beholden, not unlike a gnawing curse from which there is no deliverance. These seals represent the lifelong duty of those chosen by the gods. Maybe this is what Saint Trina was referring to, not just that godhood requires you to become nothing in the pursuit of something, but that its lifelong duty is ultimately a curse with an unbearable amount of pain and weight, from which there is no end. But at the end of the day, we made it this far, so it's our decision. The beauty of the RPG is that you get to take in the context of everything we've learned today and use that to determine what ending would be best for your playthrough. The very first ending is the default one. If you've completed none of the important NPC side quests, then you'll be granted the Age of Fracture ending. All that happens is that you assume the title of Elden Lord. That's it. The land is still broken, the demigods are dead, and not much has changed. The title of Elden Lord likely means very little in this circumstance. This ending reminds me a lot of the Age of Fire ending from Dark Souls. All we've done is uphold the status quo without changing anything. Just keeping the thing going, hoping the next guy will take care of it. The other 5, however, share a similar theme of changing the lands between in some way. 3 of which required the use of a mending rune. The Elden Ring was shattered, so these mending runes are going to mask as glue so we can get it working again. The first mending rune is received from Fia. She is a deathbed companion who is, according to her, someone who receives warmth and vigor from numerous champions. She then takes the essence of these champions and lays with the remains of a noble with the hope that they will resurrect. We could provide this essence to her by having her comfort us within her arms. I refuse to mention how long I stayed in this position. Once the feeling of loneliness is removed, even though it never will be, you will eventually be asked to give a dagger back to its owner, who is D, Hunter of the Dead. If you give the dagger to him, D will die shortly after. D is a member of Golden Order fundamentalism, who is an enemy of Fia and her people. Fia cares for those who live in death. When Godwyn was killed during the Night of the Black Knives, his body had changed. This is thanks to his half-sister Ranni, who had conspired to enact the night herself. As I mentioned, this caused their souls and bodies to split. Ranni lost her body but kept her soul, and Godwyn lost his soul but kept his body. On the night of this attack, the power of the Rune of Death that was used within their blades also spread through the roots of the Erdtree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. This created those skeletal beings known as those who live in death. They refuse the call of the Erdtree, and instead of making their way to the roots like they should, they refuse, preferring to live as these skeletal machinations. This goes against the fundamentals of the Golden Order, so Golden Order fundamentalists like D are sent to quell these threats. Fia, however, embraces those who live in death, further seeing Godwyn as the Prince of Death, the original of those who live in death. Her goal is to sleep with Godwyn to create the Rune of the Death Prince. Stopping her and us is Fortisax, the same dragon who befriended Godwyn during the war with the Ancient Dragons. They tried to stop the blight within Godwyn, but ended up becoming corrupted themselves. Assuming you defeat them, Fia will then lay with Godwyn and produce the Mending Rune. Its item description reads, "The Golden Order was created by confining destined death. Thus, this new order will be one of death restored." This either implies that death will come naturally now and people will live and die as they please, as opposed to the Golden Order where the Rune of Death was removed to prevent such a thing. Or it means that those who live in death will no longer be persecuted for their existence and can coexist peacefully under this new order. All while Godwyn seems to be granted a second illustrious life as the first of the dead. The second Mending Rune comes from the NPC Goldmask, a member of Golden Order fundamentalism. Goldmask seeks to not only understand the Golden Order but also fix it, examine the flaws, and replace them with something that will uphold the values the Golden Order should have. Despite being a fundamentalist, he actually disagrees with hunters like D, as he believes that having a boogeyman-like entity that gives fundamentalists reason to be obsessive and fanatical, those who live in death, is unnecessary and shouldn't exist in the Golden Order. Goldmask also believes that the blame of the Order can be placed on the fickleness of the gods, claiming that they are no greater than men. This draws the ire of one of his disciples, Brother Corrin. He initially joined Goldmask on his pilgrimage as he wants to continue his devout worship of the Golden Order. But he's too naive to understand that the Golden Order is not perfect, because if it was, we wouldn't be in this situation. And as the old saying goes, nothing changes if nothing changes. In many ways, appreciating something while recognizing its flaws is better than blind fanaticism. Gold Mask understands this. He sees the beauty in the Golden Order, and he addresses its flaws with love. He wants the Golden Order to be better, and we can honor this ideology by using his Mending Rune. However, the ambiguity of the ending lies in what Gold Mask considers to not be flaws. His main and only change is removing the gods, or America in this case, as her actions cause the shattering. This is the fickleness he's attempting to quell. But it only seems to address this issue. Things like the mistreatment of Omen are seemingly fine due to Gold Mask's refusal to comment on it. We also have to consider the revelations that were uncovered during the DLC. The Golden Order has been flawed from the beginning. Matir was the one filling in for the Greater Will while it abandoned its creations. That being said, Matir is out of the picture now, so maybe there is a chance for things to change. Like the default ending, it's continuing the rule of the Golden Order, but is the Order of Gold truly best for the lands between? The Golden Order was the ideology that got us into this mess, but can it also get us out? The last Mending Rune is given to us by the Dung Eater. Just by his name, the Dung Eater comes off as extremely bizarre, even by Elden Ring standards. He even wears armor with omen horns on it, despite not being an omen himself. One day in his early life, he saw a vision of guidance and a ring that would appear at the end of his life. This vision would also include a curse that would be considered a pox and reviled by all. He assumed he would be the bringer of this curse, and so decided to do the totally normal thing, which was to kill and defile anyone he saw. Killing these people would leave behind a seedbed curse, and according to its description, the seedbed would curse those it's implanted in, preventing them from returning to the Erdtree when they die. To use an example, it's like not going to heaven when you die. It's a horrible fate for someone to have bestowed upon them within the Golden Order. The reason these seedbeds work this way is actually something that was explained back in Sekiro. For those who haven't played, there was a group of enemies in that game called Headless, whose grab attack will see them shoving their hand up your rectum. Like most of Sekiro, its history is tied to ancient Japanese folklore, wherein a being called a kappa would assault victims in water by removing their shirikodama from their anuses. This is tied to a belief that the soul of the individual is found in the rectum, so these kappa are essentially stealing the souls of their victims. This is what the Dung Eater is doing, except instead of stealing your soul, he's cursing it. With enough seedbed curses, the Dung Eater will ask you to defile him, curse him with the same seedbeds, which when combined will give birth to his Mending Rune. So the bringer of the curse has now become the bearer of the curse. Nice. Its item description reads, quote, "The reviled curse that will last eternally, and the world's children, grandchildren, and every generation hence will be its pustules. If the order is defiled entirely, defilement is defilement no more, and for every curse, a cursed blessing. Over time, new generations of children will be born with the Omen curse. Those generations will then raise even more Omen children until the entire world are nothing but Omen. The ending itself is called the Blessing of Despair, because honestly it is a matter of perspective. It's a curse for humans, but a blessing for Omen. If all things are Omen, then they will no longer be subjugated by the Golden Order, as its rule is no more." The only issue comes from the Dung Eater's own words, where he says that among those born, some people will be like him, those that will defile and kill in his stead. At a minimum, this ending isn't great, as while it does mean less discrimination for the Omens, it does come at the cost of cursing. But now that he said that the seedbed cursing will continue even after the new order has been established, it's clear that the lands between is in for an eternity of pain under this new order. The last two endings don't require mending runes, as they plan to change the entire structure of the lands between without using the methods already built up by the Golden Order. The first is the Frenzied Flame, an outer god I've already alluded to throughout this video. The Ailing Village, Madness Village, this small group of Lindell soldiers on Mount Gelmir, and Midra are all affected by the Flame of Frenzy. The Madness Village is being overlooked by a small version of the Frenzied Flame, and notes in the village seem to imply that those that live here worship the flame. This is in stark contrast to the other locations which seem to have been victims of its influence. Ailing means in poor health, so the villagers were likely suffering from a deadly sickness, and the Frenzied Flame decided to make itself known to them. The soldiers of Lindell equally have been suffering from the effects of the war, and while I don't know whether or not they did this before the flame or did this as a result of the flame's influence, it seems like they're eating their comrades. The war between Rykard and the capital was a grueling, unending battle. It's no wonder they went mad as a result. Midra is of course the best example of the Frenzied Flame in action. The Abyssal Woods is completely destroyed, and the wildlife has been afflicted with madness. And yet, he was still a failed lord. He was never strong enough to become a proper lord until the end, but look at all the destruction it caused. It shouldn't be hard to understand how bad of an ending this is, but the questline itself isn't doing it any favors either. The questline first starts when you meet with NPCs Yura and Irina. Both are met in Limgrave but are eventually killed and replaced with two beings named Shardbearer and Hayeta respectively. These are not the same beings. They are two totally different people now inhabiting the bodies of the NPCs we've already encountered. It's unclear how this is even possible, but thanks to our talks in Melina, we know what they want. They serve the Frenzied Flame. Shardbearer himself is the cause for the origin of it, as when he gouged his eyes out presumably eons ago, the flame took hold within his empty eye sockets. Its envoy, the Three Fingers, is even hidden away under the capital, which is in the sewers, behind an apparition of Mohg conjured by Morgott, down a massive hole that took me longer than I want to admit to get down, and finally behind two big doors. Mateer's item description only mentions the Two Fingers, and the Three Fingers is the only one of its kind as far as we know. So either this was a way for the Frenzied Flame to mock Mateer, or it was an abnormal Two Fingers that was preyed upon by the Flame of Frenzy. Whatever its reason, the Frenzied Flame in about every circumstance has been seen as evil and reviled by most. No one is willing to take any chances with it, so anything giving off even a hint of suspicion is dealt with immediately. Unfortunately, this ended up affecting the nomadic merchants. Kale and his other nomadic brethren were punished for communing with the Frenzied Flame. Their ashes say that they were followed by a maddening disease. Madness is the status effect used by Frenzied Flame incantations, and all of Kale's people, when attacked, will cast Frenzied Flame spells. Their clothing states, however, that they were accused of heretical beliefs, possibly implying that they were wrongfully convicted. But the damage was already done. All of Kale's people were forced underground, all dying in tightly confined rooms in order to bury the Frenzied Flame. The people of that time saw them as monsters, so they granted them their wish. They chanted to the skies asking for a curse to be brought upon the land, and soon, the Frenzied Flame would be summoned to the lands between. Continuing with the questline and following Shardbearer's instructions sees you walking through this exact path. At the end are those double doors that imprison the Three Fingers. You must approach without armor, shedding yourself of your protective skin so you may be reborn anew. Now that you've been scarred by the Frenzied Flame, all that's left is to make it to the foot of the Erdtree. The Frenzied Flame will take a hold of your body just like it did with Midra, transforming you into the Lord of Frenzied Flame. If Melina was not sacrificed, she will reappear at the end. She continues to uphold the claim she stated to you at the bottom of the sewers. If you inherit the flame, she will kill you. Not only has her demeanor changed, but her hair and eye have as well. She's unleashed the power that was locked within her eye. Some have used this as evidence to suggest that Melina was the leader of the Godskins, the Gloam-Eyed Queen. The Godskins' main color palette is white, but there is a noticeable purple gem on their chest, which is where the connection comes from. But the DLC could further hint that, like her older brother, she had the Queen seal within her eye. Unlike Mesmer, who had an entire seal placed in his eye, Melina only has a different color eye, but the seal could be the marking over her eye. Unfortunately, Melina gets quite literally zero mention in the DLC outside of that one item description, so we'll likely never know what's up with her. We also don't learn what comes after the scene, as the cutscene ends right there, but Melina's actions will likely be in vain. As Hyetta says, everything has returned to the One Great. A time before the Greater Will, and a time before births, deaths, souls, and sins, when everything was just one. May chaos take the world. The last ending is the Age of Stars, headed by Ranni the Witch. As mentioned earlier, Ranni hired the Black Knife assassins so she could enact her plan. It's unexplicitly stated if she hired them to kill Godwyn, as it's possible that she just simply needed someone to die that night. When this death occurred, Ranni stabbed herself, which caused her body to die but her soul to live on in the doll. The reasoning behind this is that Ranni is attempting to challenge her fate. She wants to create a new age, but to do so she needs to remove the Two Fingers and its influence from her. Together you'll work with her Shadow Blythe, her War Counselor Igi, and Celavis to complete her goal. The first step requires us to defeat Radahn, as Ranni's fate is tied to the stars and Radahn is currently holding them up. Defeating him will have a large meteor impact the ground, giving us an entrance to the Eternal Cities. We are then to take the Finger Slayer Blade from the Nox and give it to Ranni so that she may slay her own Two Fingers. Her Two Fingers keep sending assassins in the form of these baleful shadows that look a lot like Blythe in order to stop her. Using the Finger Slayer Blade will stop the Two Fingers and the assassins. Once she does, we can find the Dark Moon Ring in Rennala's boss room, take it to Ranni, and get married to a four-armed blue doll. Hot. But this act of defiance causes a conflict within Blythe. All shadows like Malekith and Blythe are created by the Two Fingers in order to serve their Empyrean. Blythe was a tool made by the Two Fingers, and so his mind is conflicted between protecting and killing her. This is why Igi decided to put Blythe in an Everjail to make sure he doesn't escape. If we return to Ranni's place after the quest is over, we'll find that Blythe is hostile and we have to put him down. Blythe must kill Ranni. That goal was implanted into his head should Ranni go against the Two Fingers, and yet even in his last moments, he still wanted to protect her. Laid out on the floor are the corpses of a few Black Knife assassins. Blythe was protecting Ranni from them even in his delirious state. These same Black Knife assassins will also go after Igi as well, but are more successful. Judging from EG's dialogue, he knows that they're coming and knows that he'll likely not survive the encounter. My current theory is that the Black Knife assassins set their sights on Ranni and the gang after the Night of the Black Knives was over. The Black Knife assassins don't work for Ranni, merely hired by her. Alecto, the ringleader of the Black Knives, could be found in an Everjail next to Ranni's last step in her quest, so it's possible that there was some kind of beef between the two. Point being, Ranni's mates were all killed during her quest. Ranni mentions how if she is to succeed, she will have to shed everything of hers to start anew. She loves Blythe and EG. Celavis? He's better off dead, and in fact will die after you get the Fingerslayer blade, so that's good at least, but clearly she liked the other two. Blythe and EG knew what they signed up for when they pledged allegiance to her, and while this wasn't the ideal outcome, I'm sure that knowing it was in service of Lady Ranni makes it more digestible. Once you defeat the Elden Beast, you could summon Ranni, who will summon a large moon and enact the Age of Stars. From what I've seen, this ending seems to be one of the more confusing endings as it's not clear what she actually means. Plus, some have claimed that the ending is mistranslated and thus makes even less sense. Fortunately, if you complete her quest, you can take the miniature Ranni doll you found earlier to Ranni's Rise, where she will explain her entire plan quite plainly.
Mine will be an order not of gold, but the stars and moon of the chill night. I would keep them far from the earth beneath our feet. As it is now, life and souls and order are bound tightly together. But I would have them at a great remove, and have the certainties of sight, emotion, faith, and touch all become impossibilities, which is why I would abandon this soil with mine order. Wouldst thou come to me even now, my one and only lord?
Ranni wants to establish an order that doesn't involve the Golden Order. Furthermore, she wants to be away from her new order, so that worship and servitude are impossible. She wants to establish an order but not rule it like Queen Marika is. She wants it to function on its own without her or any other entity's input. One of the reasons Gold Mask is creating his mending rune is due to the fickleness of the gods. Ranni seeks to also prevent this problem by removing herself from the new order. I mean, consider the fact that the Lands Between is in the predicament that it's in because Marika shattered the Elden Ring. The god of the land made a single choice that threw the world into chaos. This is the kind of situation Ranni hopes to prevent, which is rather ironic given her plan during that night was the catalyst that led to the shattering, which also led to her half-brother being permanently altered for eternity. Ranni is the ends justify the means kind of person, willing to do whatever it takes so long as she succeeds, whether that's killing her sibling or plunging the world into chaos. This is further reinforced by the fates of EG and Blythe. Both died because of Ranni's actions. Admittedly, I feel this was less intentional and more so unfortunate, as I do believe that Ranni truly did love Blythe and EG, but it's clear that her goal was for her and for her alone. In an attempt to change her fate, she really ruined a lot of other people's fates in the process. All of these are the endings of Elden Ring, and thanks to the beauty of choice, you are free to decide which ending fits your character best. Elden Ring not only has a lot of endings, it's got the most endings in any Souls game, with Sekiro's 4 being second place. Like the land itself, the game is so large it offers a multitude of options regardless of where you are, whether that be in build variety, demigod motivation, or endings. What's great about these endings is that each one can be justified in a variety of ways. Even some of the more tragic and evil endings all have their reasons, as the player is able to define their evil. The Frenzied Flame often ranks towards the bottom on the good to evil scale given what it entails, but your actions could simply come from a nihilistic view of the world, and that life was better when we were a part of the primordial soup. If life comes with sins and emotions like this, then why bother living at all if we're to be subjugated to this for the rest of our lives? Ranni's is a lot like the Frenzied Flame, in that she wants to start from scratch, but hers is more optimistic, in that it doesn't require the death of the entire living world. Gold Mask, however, serves as a counter to Ranni, as while it does want to restart the order of things, Gold Mask understands that despite its flaws, the Golden Order is brilliant, and its bright radiance can continue to shine even brighter with just a bit of tweaking. Even the default ending has some justifications, as it could simply be that the title of Elden Lord carries with it an innate amount of power regardless of the world's status, and that power is something you crave. Or it could stem from a belief that the world doesn't need fixing and the Lands Between is fine the way it is, especially now that you are the Elden Lord. There is a lot of variety here, not just in the amount of options, but in why you choose these options, letting you truly create a playthrough that's tailored for your character's backstory and motivation, all of which result in your eventual reign and bring with it the end of Elden Ring. Elden Ring was a massive success from launch, a game that was 20 years in the making. You can't make a game like this overnight. It took not only the Souls games, but From Software's other projects like Kingsfield and Shadow Tower to really understand what works and doesn't work within their idea of a fantasy game. So it's no secret that a game that had 20 years to be refined and tweaked ended up becoming the biggest hit of all. Elden Ring was most people's first Souls game, and seeing people experience these games for the first time had me reminiscing about my playthrough back in 2016. These games, this series of games, means a lot to me, and this video was made to hopefully help you understand the love and passion that comes through in the game's writing. The Fallen Leaves tell a story, and what a masterful story it ended up being. Thanks for watching. Thank you all for watching today, and I hope you enjoyed. It's been a while since the last Souls video, so it's good that we got to revisit this series again. Since we've already covered all the Souls games though, this will be the last one for quite some time. Feel free to check out my other videos on them if you haven't though. As for the next project, well, good news, it's another long retrospective, this time on a series that's getting a remake in just a couple of months, so look out for that. As always, like the video if you enjoy and subscribe if you're new. Huge thank you to the patrons who support the channel, which you can do for as little as $1 a month in the description. Thank you to my returning viewers for coming back to another video, and take care everyone. Goodbye.